ولا تنقع يكون ولا تسبرم سي زيادة exposure ركبي مالتي كاب environmental toxins نبلو ولا بتنستم في صوديو نستنساتيو ولا نبلعو نسو خانت ناي genetic material كابتم ولدن ورسو genes نغيره وي mutate كقبرو اليوم مالتي مستعد مزماتيو أقدمهم زولد قلعت قدم 32 ورح حجية بزي أبعدنات شعت ورحنو بلو أبزعدي مولو وي فول ترم 4 سمون كون كله قدم 32 سمون زولد قلعت قرب زلا على ريسك هلو مخاوليو دك انستيو أبتنسي زقاتمن انفكشن ندحر قال حماما قاتيموان نسوان نتو ريسك وسخوخ اليو أبتنسي نيروتوكسينز نبلوم ويليد وميركوري ندحر اكسبوجر هالو نسوان نتي ريسك فاكتور كخوسخوخ اليو ndagana ha hal musta'na tahika ade وانتنسي ويدن بزحي diabetes و depression كهلوز يخلي زبل قمتات علو كمتي OB/GYNs حبريتا زهبو أب وانتنسي prenatal vitamins وكافوليك أسيد موساد قرب كتكم خليو بتوسعيخا أب وانتنسي ناي أكسجين حسرت خقاتم كلون تقولعا نسون زيادة ريسك خوش خلو خليو. Next slide please حبابا. مهم تعن تويز بالكو قلعوت بتفطرو نعيش تخلو ناي مصوات ناي مسحاق ناي حاقوس من الكثير يوم نزغ رأي قطرفو خلو ولا همزي بزنا يزعدلو مود صوتاتات بيكبو ندابل كاتل صوتو من دحر من الملكتات زير يخوينهم بعينها زي صعبوها تخوينهم كمولاد متن نعها زيادة تقداسنات زريون تزي كوينهم دغنا حاضر ايو حد بحريات زدغاغم تخوينو كم زراكين نبلون قدميت ندحريت مبال نيدوم مات امريكا همزي اجيركا محاز ويكا فلابينج بيدوم رغاب لعل تحتي مزلال كموتات فوتو ستيريوتايبي وي اود بيكوليار بيهيفيرز نبلوم سوتات كغاتم كله قرب كتحساسبنا المالتيو next slide ababa please مو ولدس معسك سكوفو جمرو مالتيو نزتات كيرا يقتر فخلو سكفت حدرم بكم تعنتوي زوت تقسكو دك شدش تورح خوينهم ناي مسحاق ناي حاقوس ملكت زير ينتو خوينهم ندحر دمس سميعهم نتا دمس مملاس ويكا ناي قص ناي حاقوس وناي حزن ملكتات زي مرآية بتشعات تورحي شموم تسويعون دحر زي ملوسو خوينهم بتشعات عسر تورحي خمو خازد اليوم نقرات إيدوم ويتقابلهم محاز ليو مرآي دحر بحد عمد خير يجميرهم دحر دونج يوم مالتيو عسر تشدش تورحي حدا قالات كتقصو تجميرهم ويقلت عمد كوينهم كا ناي كلت قالات زلو كزاربو تزي كيلهم ويكعد محجي جيرمو زنبرو وي اتشيف جيرمو زنبرو مايلستونز جبرو نقرات ندحر كي جبرو تريفهم ندحريتكم اللي سو جميرهم زتات كله قروب كسك فنان كتحساس بدان قبع مالتيو next slide أبابا I think is زيادة عن تويد عيسيو so I ليناني let's go to the next one أبابا more assessment and evaluation more American Academy of Pediatrics محبرناي pediatricians of America مالتيو قولعتسي أب كندي عدمي خنريو ويكا سكرين كنقبرو مقبع بزبل developmental delays كنبل كلنا ناي autism زي كونه سخون هال developmental delays كون غير speech and language نبلو له intellectual disabilities نبلو له مسكالوت نستتحز خون غيريو قلنا ورحة شعات 10 شمونت 24 30 ورحنا يزوم قلعت أبتي زاد اللي ناي قصرا regular child visit مالتيو screening كجبر لهم علو بفل like an autism زملكت عب 10 شمونت 24 ورحة كجبر له لذي أقداسي نتوم قلعت أب قصرا نوصدهم كلنا الحمد لله يوم نسعى خوينهم نخريوهم عندنا حاس كفتاتات نتولونا خنحتت بتعم أقداسي ناي وانقوا قالش شجر انت لنا همان كحجزنا زخلك تحبابرنا زخل سب دليها مساعدة قداسي مهنياتهم إنت أقدم كمفلات أقدم كمركبن أقدم كحجز مركبن بالطعم أقداسيو أقدم كاز جبر حجزات نتوم قلعت أزيو سلزت أمهم إذا سكرينينج بتعم أقداسيو كون دحرابت بفلاي كا توم ولدي قرب علميهم زوسخت تخوينو كان محجي عبيت قلعت ويحوات ويحات الاوتيزم دايجنوز خونو قلعت له كم قرب زرئيو بحرياتات لسكف انت خوينو ويكا بري تيرمز خون ويقدموا مستولدو قلعت اندحر كوينهم زياده قداسنت كوهابو له انت اليوها خالق كالق قصراون كوهابو مالو usually زبز قلوت دك 3 عامات مسكونو دايجنوز خونو خول يوم جن كم مخبادو خامت عنتوي زبلكوها ندحر قربازي كبر زبل عينت تقوين ولا دك 3 عامات كوينو من دايجنوز خونو خول يوم ولا دايجنوز زي كونو preliminary diagnosis كمزس نطرطر علينا زبل diagnosis انتلون اقداسي مخنياتو نقعو حسكا حاجز حبرتاتات كتركب تقل سلازخون كان زي قرب كتقسي دحرك آمنا البات ليها بحفش وبزعب وقت الزارب تقليا سلازي دحرت سكرينينج diagnosis تبستفعل على clinicians كل أخو اليوم مالتي بجكا pediatricians neurologists speech and language pathologists developmental pediatricians child psychologists psychiatrists educational specialists and occupational therapists كلهم استفعل عليهم ويا زلو خوينهم زيهم كلهم diagnose قبرو خو اليوم نتم قرعت مالتي next slide please موتي initial diagnosis كا بجكا medical and neurological examinations እንደገና ናይቶም ቆልዑት ክእለት ክንዲ ምንታይ ምዃኑ adaptive skills ብዕለታዊ መነባብሮም ዝገብርዎ ዘለውስ ከምቲ ክገብርዎ ዝግብኦም ተመጣጣናይ ድዩ ክንዴና ይድሕሪ ተሪፉሎ ዝብል መጽናዕታት ውሰር ማለት እዩ ነቶም ቆልዑት ከዓ ባህሪዮም ከመይ ከም ዝኾነ ኣዚኻ مصنع لايو نتوم ولدي مزراب ولد خا تنفولطو نجار كله منم كيف فرحنا كي تسكفنا خنزارب علنا زي فاميلي هيستوري زبحال ابانا بزو حيزربني وصنيو كن والا نطرطرو نفولطو نجار انتلو ازينا اجهدنا انت تزاربنا كتقمنا خلي مالتيو كابو حمد لاينتو خا blood testing hearing testing مسمع كلته مالتي اذا blood test قبل كله هوغن قرب كيدناغروكم ببلاد تيست من مسوس تحازه diagnosis يلن autism diagnosis اجزنا مالتي next slide please ابا مو انت عينت حاجه زين intervention in the دليك كغبرلهم كالي زبل تقديم كمفلات اقداسي زبلو أبزخون كاونتي ويكتما نبرسب مسألة له تمثل كا child find زبحال بفدرال ويكا بناي منجست أمريكا مانديتر زخونة أب كل زقومة أقولقلوت أبوشتي تي local school system زقومة child find زبحال organization هم تشم زو تقصو child find بتي كبابي نزلو قلعوت حاجز نزل اليوم دليقة أتصاريقة حجز مهابيو child find referral زد ليو يكونن بعلق مولدي contact غيركم أبتزلوهم locality نتي child find assessment نايقول ع development كتروحوا مسلكم يو مسؤول تحيزكا حجز زد ليو قول عشعو نتي school system infants and toddlers بهال أو refer قبروهم مالتيو أو refer مسقبروهم كم أدلاينتو ولا بجزاها مسيوم حاجة زهبو حسابات ولا speech and language therapy ديو occupational therapy ديو ولا physical therapy هم أجدا سنتو كقرب الكحولية مالتي من الباش بزعب عزيون لهذا حرك في اختزار بتخليا نجناتهم قلعت هاب نسنتهم كله individualized educational plan و IEP زبالة صحيح لهم تمع باليوم كندينا مخانو እንዳረኣዩ ከዱ ማለት እዩ ከመድ ኣገዳስነቱ ፊዚካል ቴራፒ ስፔች ቴራፒ ከምኡ ከዓ ቢሄቪራል ቴራፒ ብፍላይ ABA applied behavioral appliances ዝብልዎ ኣሎ ንሱ ኣብ ብጣዕሚ ኣገዳሲ እዩ በብቲ ንነብረሉ ገዛውቲ ዓዲ እቲ ዘሎና ሪሶርስ ንፍለጦ ተን ዝተፈላለያ ስቴት ዝተፈላለያ ሓገዝ እየን ዝህባ ኣብዚ ሕጂ ኣነ ዝነብረሉ ስቴት ሜሪላንድ autism waiver ዝበሃል ኣሎ ቆልዑት ዳያግኖስ ክኾኑ ከለዉ እቶም ወለዲ እንድሕር ነቲ DDA ወይ developmental disabilities agency ዝበሃል officially diagnosed ምስ ኮኑ እቶም ቆልዑት እንድሕር ንዖም ኮንታክት ገይሮም ካብቲ ስቴት እቶም ወለዲ ይኹኑ እቶም ቆልዑት ክረኽብዎ ዝኽእሉ ሓገዝ ብጣዕሚ ልዑል እዩ ለውጥታት ከዓ ከምፅ እዩ ቅድሚ 5-6 ዓመታት ኣፕላይ ጌርካ ስጋብ ነዚ ትረክብ 16 ዓመት ወስን ነይሩ ሕጂ ግን ሓፂሮሞ ዳርጋ 8 ዓመት ይወሪዱ ዘሎ እዚ ከዓ ኣገዳሲ ስለዝኾነ እቶም ደቀና ቀልጢፎም ነቲ ሓገዝ እቶም ወለዲ ሓበሬታ ክረኽቡ ነዚኣ ክላዎ ብፈቱ next slide please ኣበባ እሞ ከም ሰብ ሞያ መጠን ኣነ ከም ሳይኪያትሪስት መጠን ዝተፈላለዩ እዋናት ኢንቮልቭ ዝኾነሉ ግዜታት ኣሎ እዚ ከዓ እንዳዓበዩ ክኸዱ ከለዉ እቲ ባህርያቶም እቲ ዘርእይዎ ምልክታት ፀገም ዝፈጥር እንተኮይኑ መጀመርያ ነቶም ቆልዑት ንርእሶም እንደገና ከዓ ንወለድዮም ወይ ከዓ ንከባቢኦምን ንትምህርቶምን ማለት እዩ ምስ ተሓይስካ ወይ ንነፍስኻ self injurious behavior ንብሎ ነፍስኻ ምህራም ንርእስኻ ምግጫው ምንካስ ከምኡ ከዓ ንኻልኦት ምህራም ምስ ተሓይስካ ካልእ ቢሄቪራት ኣሎ እዚ OCD ንብሎ obsessive compulsive disorder ቆልዑት ናይ autism ዘለዎም ብዙሕ ኣዝዩ ዝረኣዩ ናይ attention problem ክህልዎም ክእል እዩ ምስ ተሓይዘ ኣብ autism spectrum disorder ዘለዎ ቆልዑት sensory integration disorder ዝበሃል ኣለዎም ብጣዕሚ sensitive እዮም ንድምፂ ንጨና ወይ ከዓ texture ከማን ወላ ናይ ምግቢ ገሊ እዋናት ዝምገበዎ ምግቢ ብጣዕሚ restrictive እዩ ቁሩብ ከምዚ ብዙሕ ልሙስ ዝኾነ ምግብታት ኣይፈቱን እዮም ቁሩብ ክራንቺ ዝኾነ ምግብታት እዮም ዝፈቱ ምስ ኣፋውሳት ተሓይዝካ ክልተ ፋውሳ ኣለዋ approved ዝኾና ኣብ autism ክትጥቀመለን ትኽእል እዚ ከዓ ምስቶም ባህሪኦም ወይ ነፍሶም ዝጎድኡ ወይ ከዓ ንኻልኦት ከምኡ ኣብ ፀገም ዝፈጥር ኩነታት ክኸውን ከሎ እዩ ተዘይኮይኑ ቁሩብ supplements ከም በዓል ሜላቶኒን multivitamin probiotics ከዓ ብዙሕ ናይ ንቕፀት constipation ሽግር ስለ ዘለዎም ንሱታቱን ክጠቅም ክእል እዩ next slide ኣበባ and ኣብ ቆልዑት ወይ ከዓ ዋላ መንእሰይ autism ዘለዎም epilepsy ወይ seizure disorder ዳርጋ 30 ኣለዎም ናይ ፀገም ናይ ምድቃስ ክህልዎም ክእል እዩ እንደገና ከምቲ ዓንቶ ዝበልኮ ናይ feeding issues ወይ ከዓ ናይ ምምጋብ ፀገም ክህልዎም ክእል እዩ I think ቁሩብ ሰዓታት ደንጉያ ከይከውን ኣበባ tell me how I'm with time
yeah just one or two more minutes
okay. No
Thank
problem
you. Yeah
okay. Next slide please ኣበባ موزيان أبزي أقربيان زلقو resources national and local resources ين National Institute of Health Centers for Disease Control CDC كبابينا عاب كل خبابي Autism Speaks بحالالو American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry American Academy of Pediatrics كمو خا من الباش دياهم زعوت صار بتخليا ببزح كبابي توم ولدين بعلهم ማሕበር ፈጢሮም ንሕዶም ዝተሓጋገዙሉ ንሕዶም ዝተሓባበሩሉ መደባት ፈጢሮም ኣለው ኣብዚ ከባቢ ዋሽንግተን ዲሲ ብፍላይ ኢትዮጵያን ኤሪትሪያን ስፔሻል ኒድስ ችልድረን ዝብል ማሕበር ወለደ ዘቆምዎ ኣሎ ብዙሕ እንቀሳቀስ እዮም ብዙሕ ሕጉዝ እዮም ኣምሹር ኣብ ከባቢኡን ስለ ዘለዎ ምስኦምን ሓበሬታ ምግባር ክጠቅም ክእል እዩ I think ናይ መወዳእታ ያመስለኒ ተሪፋ ዘላ last slide please ሞዚት in summary እዩ እንታይ ምዃኑ ዝገልጽ እዩ ብዛዕባኡ ብዙሕ ተዛሪበ ኣለኹ ስለዚ ምድጋማ የድልኝ እዩ ሞ ዘናተይ ዘረባ እዚኣ ተጠቕበል እየ thank you
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop your slides and I'm going to let our next speaker get her slides ready. So thank you, Dr. Salase, for your presentation. I see a hand raised. We are going to just move along to our next speaker, and then at the end, we'll be able to have people ask any questions for our three panelists. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Maria. Dr. Maria is an associate professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. She is the director of neuroscience graduate program at University of Texas Southwestern. She received her PhD from Baylor College of Medicine in molecular and human genetics. Her research focuses on the genetics and mechanisms of autism. Her research includes how to identify causative genes and perform studies to understand how these genes are affected in autism, with the ultimate goal of improving diagnosis and developing future therapies. So welcome, Dr. Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you to Dr. Berhane and the organizers for this opportunity to speak. I want to start by sharing an overview of the work that my lab does and focus specifically on our autism gene identification efforts in collaboration with the East African community here in Dallas, and that collaboration led by Leah Simutesfa, the third speaker for today. So, Dr. Salesi gave a comprehensive and wonderful lecture about autism and everything you need to know about the presentation, the clinical manifestations. I just have one slide about that, and I just want to stress that it is a spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders, as the name suggests. And currently, according to the CDC, it affects up to 2.8% of children in the United States, with more males affected than females. And we know that the prevalence rate has been increasing annually at about 7% for the past 20 years, posing huge societal and economic burdens that are more than the cost of cancer, heart disease, and stroke all combined. So it's about $175 billion a year. The core symptoms are this impaired communication, social behavior deficits, and restricted interests and repetitive behaviors. But there are also these a host of comorbidities, as Dr. Salesi mentioned. There are behavioral, psychiatric, developmental, or medical conditions that can also be present in the individual with autism. And these percentages here are just some of the numbers to show proportions of patients with autism who also have these comorbidities, with, for example, motor abnormalities being one of the higher, on the higher side, with 79% of patients having those, intellectual disability, ADHD, and so on. And so, my work really focuses on the causes of autism. We know that the clinical presentation is very complex, as you heard in the first lecture by Dr. Salesi. And we know that autism is highly heritable. So what that means is that the manifestations that you see are due to genetics of the individual. But the heritability is not exactly 100%. It's somewhere between 83 and 90%. And so this suggests that there are also some environmental factors that affect, that also lead to autism. And I just want to highlight one example that was also mentioned by Dr. Salesi, which is the parental age. So there's an increase in mutations that are carried in the germ cells of the parents as they age, and this increases the risk of having children with autism. And so my work focuses on the genetic side of things. And this heritability number was really determined by these twin studies. So basically looking at hundreds of thousands of monozygotic twins or identical twins and dizygotic twins, as well as siblings and other family members. And so when you see monozygotic twins having the same exact clinical manifestation, this suggests that it's due to genetics 100%. And so this is how these numbers are calculated. And so human genetics, I just wanted to pause for a minute here and just, give you a super brief intro. It's studying the inheritance of traits by offspring from their parents. Essentially, what we do is we try to figure out the relationship between these changes in our DNA sequence or variants or genomic variation and our traits that we present with, which could be physical traits, psychological traits, mental traits, and so on. It's what makes us who we are as individuals, how we interact with our society and the environment. And it also forms the basis of human health. We use genetics for predicting if someone will develop a certain condition, for diagnosing it, as well as developing treatments or targeted therapies. And so, from over the past 2 decades, there have been many human genetic studies focusing on autism. And what we found as a field is that there are hundreds of genes that contribute to the condition. Some of these genes are very well-known genes that give rise to specific syndromes, for example, Fragile X syndrome, Rett syndrome, and so on. And so these genes are also mutated or affected in autism. Another class of genetic changes are the chromosomal abnormalities, or what we call copy number variants. And these are basically big regions of the genome that are either deleted, removed, or they're duplicated. So you either have less or more, and that can give rise to autism. And then there are what we call spontaneous mutations, or the technical term for them is de novo. And these are the mutations that arise either in the germ cell of a parent, so you don't see it in the parent if you test their, to take a blood sample and do a genetic test, because they only arise in germ cells, or they arise very early during embryonic development. And so even though they're genetic, they're not inherited from the parents. And then the second category is the inherited mutations. And this is a situation where you have one copy of a mutation in a gene in either parent, and then the 2 copies meet in the child, and the child has the clinical presentation. And then finally, there are what we call somatic mutations. And these are changes that are only happening in the genome of the brain. And these are a new class of mutations that have been identified for autism. So what we've learned so far is that hundreds of genes contribute to the condition. The problem is that each of these genes individually accounts for a very small proportion of individuals. So for example, the Fragile X gene that I mentioned, FMR1, accounts for about 1.9% of autism patients, and that's the highest gene. We have some genes that are only found in 0.08% of patients with autism. And so this told us that autism genetics is extremely complex and extremely heterogeneous, just like the phenotype or the clinical manifestation is very heterogeneous. And so, and on top of that, today we've only identified about 35% of genes that could give rise to autism, even though these are hundreds of genes. And for the vast majority of cases, 65%, the genetic underlying cause is still unknown. And so because of this, we started thinking about autism as a collection of individually rare genetic subtypes or individually rare disorders. And as I'm sure many of you know, that if you've ever met an individual with autism, you've only met that one individual with autism. They're very unique in their phenotype or clinical manifestation. And it's the same is true for genetics. The genetics is very heterogeneous, and these mutations are super rare in the population. And so in order to start really thinking about targeted therapies or even genetic diagnosis, we have to really understand, first we have to identify these genes. And second, we have to really understand the specific mechanisms at the molecular level that are affected in each of these genetic subtypes. Because then you can start grouping patients like, okay, this genetic subtype is due to changes in genes in a particular region of the brain. And then the other genetic subtype is due to changes that affect, multiple brain regions and so on. And then you can start thinking about targeted therapies. And this is what my lab is interested in. We do gene discovery in autism. We want to identify the specific genes and the specific changes in these genes or mutations that give rise to autism. And more importantly, we want to understand how this mutation affects what the gene is doing. As Dr. Selesi mentioned, these genes affect brain development and brain function, but how are they exactly doing that? And this is what my lab is trying to understand and investigate. And then we hope that this information is used for diagnosis through doing genetic testing and for eventually developing targeted therapies. So it's not enough to say, okay, the gene affects brain development. We need to know where in brain development, which step between A to B to C that's being affected, so we can target that specific step. And for today, I'm going to focus on our work in terms of gene discovery, specifically how we do this in collaboration with familial cohorts. So these are communities of families who have one or more children affected with autism. And as I mentioned, I'll start telling you about the study in general, but then I want to focus on our collaboration with the East African community here in Dallas. Okay, before I tell you about the actual study, I just want to give you an idea of the challenges that we face. So the human genome has 3 billion letters, and these are the DNA base pairs that make up our genome. And we all share 99.9% of our genomes. So the difference is only present in about 3 to 4 million changes. And from these 3 to 4 million changes, our work basically, the goal of our work is to find the 1 or 2 changes in the genome that are causing autism. So we have to go from this 3 to 4 million to basically 1 or 2 so that we can identify the causative genes. And so we started this human genetics study back in 2016, where we're enrolling families who have 1 or more children with autism. And basically the eligibility criteria is that you have to be above 3 years old, because that's when the diagnosis is typically confirmed, and to have a clinical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. If the individuals already have a genetic test that has confirmed some of these known syndromes, for example, Fragile X, Rett syndrome, or MECP2 duplication syndromes, and so on, we don't enroll them in the study because the genetics are already known and figured out. We want cases where the genetic is unknown. And so we have 2 main methods that we use for the study. We either sequence the entire exome, and that's basically the portion of the genome that codes for proteins or the building block of cells. Or another method that we use is whole genome sequencing. That essentially gives us more information, and it's more comprehensive. And then the potential results is we either find something positive. We know that this is causing the condition because it has been seen before. Or we get a negative result where, we don't know, we know for sure that this is not causative, or the result might be not interpretable, at least at present time, because we need more research to figure that out. And so I just want to, this is basically on the study procedure. We basically, interested families can contact us, and then we collect either blood samples or cheek swabs, depending on the age. And then we can do this locally in Dallas, but we also send what we call a study kit, basically a box that the family can take to any LabCorp location across the United States. And then we also do it at local hospitals here. But just to give you the 3 possible outcomes before I go into the specific study. So first is where we identify benign variants. So benign meaning that they are not pathogenic, and we know that they're not causing any condition. And so we don't report that back to the families. These are normal variation that we see in the genome of individuals. And then the second is whether the variant is of unknown clinical significance. So at present, we don't know what this is doing. And we also don't report these because we need more research to figure it out. And then finally, if we do find something that is pathogenic, meaning we know that this is causing autism because it has been seen before repeatedly, then we have an option to report that. And the way we do that is, on the consent form for the study, the patient indicates or the family indicates whether they want to find out or not. And in the vast majority of cases, they say that they want to find out. And so when we identify a pathogenic variant, we contact the referring clinician so that we can share the result and so they can validate it in a CLIA certified lab. That essentially means a lab that's certified to do genetic testing for clinical purposes, since we're a research lab. And so we started doing this, and our goal was to really partner with our local communities, and then to partner with our clinical colleagues so that we can obtain very detailed phenotyping information. And what I mean by that is detailed medical history and clinical information. And then we want to use our unique strength in this area, which is to use information from ancestry. So as I told you, we all share ancestry, and our work specifically focuses on families where there is a recent shared ancestry. So where the parents are related either as first cousins, second cousins, and so on, because that just makes it easier to identify the genes underlying a particular trait. Or distant shared ancestry. These are communities where they've lived together for centuries, and so they share more of their genome. And then more importantly, the third category is the genetically diverse populations. And these are populations where their genomes has more of these specific rare variants that you don't see in any other populations. And we hope, that our work will inform not just the diagnosis and potential therapies in the future, but we want to learn about how does the brain develop, how do we develop these behaviors, and specifically social behavior and language, and what are the genetics of these processes in the brain. And so since starting this, we've enrolled a little under 900 families, and that's a little over 3,000 individuals that we have in 3 specific cohorts. So the first one is the Dallas-Fort Worth, or DFW cohort, and these are the local families. And the cohort is very ancestrally diverse. We have families who are white, African-American, Hispanic, East Asian, South Asian, and so on. And then we have shared ancestry cohorts that I mentioned, but specifically one of them is a group of families from Jordan where the parents are related. And then the second cohort is a group of families from Utah who belong to one community of several generations of very large pedigrees and multiple affected individuals. And then the last cohort that's going to be the focus of my talk today is the East African cohort, and I'll tell you a little bit in more detail about this. And we're really excited about this work, and because the genetic studies that Dr. Selesi mentioned that were funded by the NIH and many other organizations, the vast majority of them actually focused on white European populations. And for the longest time in our field, nobody had looked at other populations except for white European populations. Now, and I'm going to talk about the implications for that in a few minutes. But that's basically why we're excited about our local diverse cohort, and also about the East African cohort. And these are, I'm just listing the 3 studies that have been published on these cohorts recently from my lab. So the way the project started, this is a cohort of families with autism from the local East African community here in Dallas. And there were 3 motivators for this project. First, it was this observed higher prevalence of autism in the community, which is up to about 5%. As opposed to anywhere between 2.2 to 2.8% in the general population. And then the second motivation was the genetic diversity in Africa. So Africa is home to an ancient genomes. And so these ancient genomes have a lot more genetic diversity. And so they will just give you more information than if you were to look at more recent populations. And then the third was this severe underrepresentation in genomic studies. As I told you a minute ago, the vast majority of studies would focus on white European populations. And so just a little side note about the global prevalence of autism. So I told you that, the prevalence in the United States, the latest estimates from the CDC suggest that it's about 2.8%. Well, the problem is that in the current worldwide estimate is about 1% of children have autism. But the problem is that this does not include many low and middle income countries because it has focused specifically on higher income countries. And this is the distribution of the prevalence studies. This is a global map, and the blue dots are where the prevalence studies have been conducted. And you can see it's mainly in North America, Europe, and a little bit in Asia. And if you've already noticed that in Africa, there are only 4 prevalence studies that have been done. One in Libya, and it was a very small study that reported as 0.3% prevalence. So we know that this is because of the small sample size of this study, which was about 30,000, as opposed to hundreds of thousands to millions in other countries. And then in Nigeria, there's one prevalence study that, again, has a very, very small sample size of 721, and they found that the prevalence is 2.9%. In South Africa, 0.1%. And finally, the 4th one was done in Uganda and found that it's 0.7%. And so from other studies that have been done, prevalence studies that have focused on specifically East African parents, found that there's several studies that I want to mention here. The first one is a study on Somali parents living in Sweden that found the prevalence to be up to 3 to 4 times higher in these children compared to their non-African peers. And then the second one was a study, again, in Sweden that found a higher rate of autism specifically to Somali and Ethiopian parents. Another study actually was out of the CDC because one of their centers was in Minnesota, and they found that there's a 3% prevalence in the Somali population. And then finally, a study out of Texas that was actually led by Leah Seyum Tesfa, and found that it's up to 5% in Ethiopian and Eritrean populations in Texas compared to their non-African peers. And so this higher incidence of autism in East African populations suggested to us as geneticists that there has to be some shared genetic susceptibility that's predisposing these children to autism. And so that's how the motivation for this initial part of the study. So this is the first motivator for us, was this increased prevalence. And we wanted to ask, okay, what is the genetic contribution to this increased prevalence? And then the second, as I told you, was the genetic diversity in Africa. And I just want you in these plots to focus on this plot here, the circle in red. The populations here in red are from Africa. And you can just tell that by the way that this is plotted, that these populations compared to all other populations from Europe, Middle East, and other parts of Asia and America, that the African populations have the highest number of rare genetic variants in their genome. And then the second plot here, just the arrow pointing to the African populations compared to non-African populations. So the colors red, orange, and yellow refer to the Xhosa in South Africa, East Africans and West Africans compared to other populations. And so this was the second motivator for our study. And then, I told you about the underrepresented. This is another basically way to visualize genetic diversity. This is a study that looked at populations in Uganda, the Zulu population in South Africa, and the Ethiopian population. And you can see that they found up to 4.6 million variants compared to the other numbers, compared to non-African populations. And the conclusion from this study was that populations in Africa have 24% of genomic variants compared to of all novel and private variants. And so this was the second motivator. And so we started this study, and actually it was inspired by me meeting Leah and starting this collaboration together. And she was really the driving force in the community, in the East African community in Dallas behind this. And we worked together to structure the study protocol and to talk to families and to talk to the community about this. And our goal was really to leverage this ancestral genomic information in the unique African genome that is severely underrepresented in all other studies, so that we can do whole genome sequencing and then a new analysis that's really actually a very old analysis. It's called admixture analysis, but it had never been applied to autism before. And so this was the strength of our study. And we wanted to look in this population because we were intrigued by the unusually high rate of autism. And our study was published in 2023, and you can see here it was featured on the cover of the scientific journal by beautiful artwork from an East African artist, actually, that Leah knows. And then it was one of the first studies to actually investigate the genetics of autism in an African population. So we're very proud of that. And just to super briefly summarize what we found, we did this in 33 families, and the vast majority of families were actually Ethiopian and Eritrean, and we had one Kenyan family. And the total was 129 individuals. And you can see the clinical presentation here. Everybody, all the children who enrolled in the study with autism, they all had autism, so 100%. And then the majority had speech abnormality, developmental delay, learning disability, and so on. You can just see the percentages of these clinical presentations in the study participants. And so, as I mentioned, we wanted to go from these 3 to 4 million changes or differences in the genome to find the ones that are causative. And because we were looking at a very genetically diverse population, as I told you a minute ago, we ended up finding not 3 to 4 million changes, but actually 5 million variants. So these were the total variants in the genome of every individual. And then if we said, okay, let's just look at the rare ones, because we know that these are, the rare ones are the ones that are potentially causing autism. These are about 220,000. And then novel variants. So I just want to highlight that our study, regardless of looking at autism, we ended up identifying 130,000 variants that nobody else had reported. So these are variants that these are just normal changes in the genome, but nobody had reported them in all of the scientific databases and previous studies, simply because they had not sequenced an East African population to this type of sequencing that we had done. And then we found 2 million variants that were private, meaning these were only present in one individual in the cohort. And so if you look at all 129 individuals in total, we found 2 million private variants. So these initial numbers are just to show that, yes, indeed, like we thought, the East African genome is pretty genetically diverse and also pretty ancient, if you think about it in terms of genetics. And then the summary of our findings is that, well, first, the initial accomplishment that we actually established this collaboration and community partnership, and we established the first East African autism familial cohort. And then we were able to leverage the ancestral information in the genome in this cohort of increased prevalence. We discovered about 2 million new private variants. And then we found rare variants that occurred in genes that were already known to be associated with autism. And then we ended up finding new candidate genes. And the reason I say candidate is that because, this was one study, it's a small scale study in 129 individuals, and we need to do a lot more to basically confirm these new genes. And then we use this method, admixture mapping, to identify regions in the genome that increase autism risk in these individuals. And here on the right, I just listed some of these genes. And in terms of follow-up, we are still actively enrolling. We had a dip in our enrollment and recruitment efforts a few years ago with the COVID pandemic, but we're picking back up, and we're seeking funding from multiple agencies to expand this cohort and grow our collaboration. And then to be able to prioritize the genes so we can actually study their function in the brain. So I told you that, our main goal is to find these genes, but what we really need to do is now understand what they're doing in the brain and investigate the mechanisms that they control for brain development and function. And so In summary, I want to emphasize again the importance of community partnerships in driving research. We would not have been able to do any of this without our partnerships with Leah and her foundation and the local community. And equity in healthcare. So I had told you that the vast majority of studies focused on white European populations. And so when you do that, the information that you're putting in all of these genetic databases is based on or focused on one ancestral background, but you have many different ancestries of patients who are coming to the clinic. And so to be able to interpret a clinical genetic test, you need information from all populations. And then our study, even though it was very small scale, it just highlighted the power of African genetic diversity to inform complex conditions, specifically heterogeneous and complex condition like autism. And there are concerted efforts in the field at the moment, and I want to just mention one of them. And that's the H3 Africa project. It's led by the Human Heredity and Health in Africa, or H3 Africa Consortium. We collaborated with them because when we were doing our study, we needed a control population from Africa. We needed data from controls that these are individuals with no autism so that we can do the comparison. And we were able to collaborate with this consortium. And we are hoping that our work in gene discovery and understanding the function of these genes will generate this self-propelling flywheel, if you want to think about it like that, to go all the way from gene discovery to diagnosis, to inform the genetic testing, and then hopefully for targeted therapies. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But I just want to thank my lab members. These are the actual people who do the work, and the alumni. But then first and foremost, the patient and the families that drive our research. And our collaborator, Leah Tesfa, H3 Africa, and other collaborators and cores that helped us along the way in our funding sources. Thank you. I will stop sharing so you can...
There we go. Thank you so much. And thank you for your presentation and sharing all of your research. We will have time for our question and answer at the end. We now have our third and final speaker for tonight, and it's Leah Tesfa. And I'll give her introduction as she pulls her slides up. Miss Leah Tesfa received her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Texas Women's University, and then completed nurse practitioner training at UT Southwestern Medical School. She also earned her master's degree in special education, focusing on autism intervention from the University of North Texas. After the diagnosis of her twin boys with autism, she became a full-time mother and advocate for children. She is the founder and president of the Reaching Families Advocacy and Support Group, which is a nonprofit organization that supports Eritrean and Ethiopian families raising children with neurodevelopmental disabilities in the United States. She is passionate about autism awareness, overcoming stigma, early identification, and effective treatment for neurodevelopmental conditions. So welcome, Ms. Leah Tesfa.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, مجمرتا فرق تجرينيا فرق إنجليش الزارب تجرينيا يتصوروا سلازي كونه ناو إنجليش خيد خوني I will try my best بتجرينيا خزارب. This is نايف مجمرتا جزي بتجرينيا present كجبر مجمرا قانقوا يم حرينيا سلازي كونه يقدر تجبروا لي صبوا عند حزي تزاربه. I'm sorry for the language if I butcher the language. But it's بتعمي زدلينا important خونه message علني ناتي مدب بزعبا ناتي experience بزح عامت مستدرا بيت صريح اللخو أنا وين كلت 4 قلقوا تعلوني كلتي إسران شو عتن جيروم حجي من تايوم عودات on the opposite ends of the spectrum يلدوم دلو حدا دكتور كم زقلت أنا حدا قاليهم بتعمي سفير دخونه مايلد مودريت إلولو دك حدا بتعمي مايلديو حدا ودي دما بتعمي دتا جود أي بزح أوتيزم على ودي يعدل كال تجمعون على مس أوتيزم زمتس so تخلو سبيكترم الأيوة بزح سدرابيت زحجز كلما بزح experience رخيبة له كابز ناتي experience له ميزرد زارب ناتين اتهم سدرابيت زحجز كوم انتاينا خنقبر دلنا سدرابيت ندك أنا بمالتيو زارب كم زقلتو ناي Eritrean families تبع organization هلني privilege نيروني مس دكتور مريا كنسرح ريسيرش كنقبر أب بزحات دما organization بزعو خزاربي نسرح لنا حجي زي عامل يامنيا تنحري لكم this is my life دك قالوا أوتيزم دلوهم 4 قلتهم دلوني كلتي أودات كم زبالكم زرداكم أوتيزم علوم حنت عباي قوالا لاتني حنت نشتغلون لاتني كلتي دك أي وندما تيبيكال دخونو أب أوتيزم يوم دسرحو عباي قوالي اي بي سنتر اللوا بي سي بي اي تان اشتغالي دما ممهريا ناي أوتيزم ممهريا ناي 3-4 عمت دلوهم قولوت so in a nutshell حجي دما grandmother قوالي ولي دالا so I'm enjoying life I'm very blessed so زناتي presentation بزح دكتور قليز أولو I'm here نالو انتاي مخانو autism and early intervention كله أنا مجمرتا انتاي كنقبرتا لنا سدرا بيتي انت حردك أنا autism اللو انتاي كنقبر لنا إلي بزعبو يززارب زي أعطوما بتحتي تريوم دلوخو ودي my twin boys 3 عامت diagnose كونو خلو زلونا picture يعني maybe someone diagnose تقبروا لك على picture سلزخونه بزح memorial لني بزي عام picture حجي وانا نجر انتايو كنقبر دلنا زي autism سيدك أنا autism مستوالو كنفلتو لنا autism انتايو اوكي accept كنقبروا لنا كنقبلوا لنا ندحر تقبل زي قبلنايو كنسرح ينخلينا حجي كنقبلوا سي ستيجز الله جلسة denial عندي قبلوني نازي خونا يقولني لنا autism يكون ممكن نبلنا خلينا جلسة أدم كنحرق نمنتاي كم زخونا كال أدم جيلت له أنا دي تلفزيون بزح رأيديو زي بالي عادي زي عقبركم كوينة كنبلنا خلينا كال أدم bargaining دبال دمان تايو مس أي كون إزي أي كون أنا سي autism أي تجهبني كال نجر مس እግዚአብሔር سي كنقالس نخلينا كالي دما ديبريس كنخون نخلينا انا سي حاسب دك اي دكتور كونو كمحارو صبق بصحم بر زي اوتيزم اي كمصني اي غباني يبحالالو كالي دما اب مጨረሻ زخو خالفنا كنقبلو علنا اندحر ابز ستيج كمزي حالفنا زي بصحنا ابت ديبريشن دو ابت جيلتي اندحر صنحنا حاجز كن دليل لنا نمنتاي اندحر تقبلنا يو اكسبت يقبرنا كنت صارح لهم كنحجزهم اي نخلينينا ندقنا كنحجزهم كنت صعر لنا نمنتاي نحنا هنا وانا ادفوكيتنا يدقنا نحنا هنا كل نجر كنقبر لهم من قست تمرتي ولا ترابيتات بانشورانس قالوا قل نحنا ندحر دي قوينا ندحر كده خيرنا ايكوني سلازي كنقبلوا لنا كنقبلوا مالت استي جيف اب مقبر يكون بقى اوتيزم علو كوف كبلي يكون انتاي يدقبر انتاي يقبروا لنا كم دكتور كم زرد عنا تبنيشتي ام حاجز انتحر رخيبهم زبالتين قلتيفهم كم محاشو خقلو يوم كن كوفينا ازي جزينا اندحر كن اكسبت كنقبر جزين اندحر وسيدونا ندحريتهم يحالفوا مالتو جزي زغيروا له important هنا سب if نايب حق ادب لكم اندحر كتقبلوا تشجركم كوينكم بجاختكم حاجز قالو زحجز كونسلينج قالو بناتنا جروب زعبانا جروب كزاربي كنقبلوا لنا وانا ساينا مجمرتا ستيب نمنتاينا قدمنا انترفنشن كنقبر تقدلنا اندحريلنا ناي برين ديفلوبمنت 93% before kindergarten كأتو خلو 93% develop كيرولو كديفلوب قبر كله يت intervention زسرة اندحرت أنحنا كسا هموشت عمت كسا 4 عمت تك زغير له جزي حالي فولو نمنتاي نحنا سلازي قبرنايو أكسبت سلازي قبرنايو ولا قسن دابلنا يتصنحيو ولا خزاربيو أبوك أسيلو تزاريبو مخنيات أمتينا ندحب تنحنا زي جزي أوك حالفهم لومي ونايدك أنامو زي أبدأ important نجاريا كال دما انتهلو انتهي نبلنا كالك قانقوا أبجزا تقريني أنا نزارب حريني أنا نزارب ندابلا ليك خون كله زنا أوتيزم ساين كنريو خلنا language delayed لوسي سلا قانقوا سلام نزارب سو بالريسيرش جيرومو انتهم د رخيبهم دلو كالك قانقوا عندي حرالو توم قولت قانقوا يحوسو ولا تجرامر ناي إنجليش كم زناي كبانا كم نزاربو maybe تي إنجليش كمان أجيرو نزاربو أبي تمرتو خلو خلو حاجة زي اليوم ناي قانقوا أمبر ناي speech أيكون speech delay ب second language exposure زخونو أيكون أيمت زناي autism نريو speech delay ب second language متى أي زينا كمان نفلتو evaluation دحر جرنا أوكي حجي إذا evaluation دكتور صبوا جيرو جريت لكم على جن انتهلوا مثلكم نحنا كنت أرى لنا تي دلين دحرينا نتوم حاكم كن خيد كلنا كن نقرم علنا نحنا أو وديسي نشتغل دحريتا لذي سكرين دبع الدكتور درد عنا أب كله حكمنا يقبريهم قال تيفون فاكسين جيرون قال هو يوم تدلوا تريو لهم دكهم هوسبيتال كتوصلوا خلهم أب كلينيك قال تيفون يوم تسرحوا سلا نحنا عن انتحرت أرتينا دكتور بجخز ودي كم ندحريتي لولو إذا أوتيزم سايريو له بجخ ريفرال سددلي بجخ أوتيزم إيفالويشن كجبرلو بزوحات عند زي حجزهم سدرابيت دكتور يكونوا درخوا لهم بعلهم صمت سدرابيت بسوشيال ميديا خون أنا سمعونا خون يدولوا لي كم زبلوا لهم دكتور جن سئلون له نسخي خطزارة بالله كنسخا كيكا نبت حاكم إيفالويشن جبرلي كنبلوم علنا حجي أبزي صحافكو intervention ناي autism انتايو دكتورون تزاريو ولو ABA applied behavior analysis دبحالالو speech therapy occupational therapy physical therapy feeding therapy nutritional therapy زي diet gluten free casein free قالن بلو ناي biomedical دمالو حجي إزي كلهم نقولهم قلت يد اليوم مالتا يكونون كمزح كلهم دكتور كمزح ردونا هذا ودد autism every child with autism is different okay قال feeding اليوم كلهم يكونوا physical therapy كلهم اليوم ينو so it's evaluation زحق زناتنا autism evaluation جيرهم زياد اليوم زي area إنه دحريتوا له إلهم دبلو nutritional dietary intervention بزح زي كاب حكيم evaluate تقبروا عين سمعونينا جن أنا بناتي تمكرو زراعي هو نجر إذن دايت اندحرك أيرنا يوم زي gluten free كيسين فري تبحى لما وانا دايت يا اندحرك أيرنا له ما بزحتيهم كلهم ما يكونوا ندبل ما بزحتيهم جن كم ما حشو كلهم هذا دوما زي biomedical functional medicine بزا أبا بزح إريتراويان نجبرينا بزح نمكرين نزارينا important يا جن تاينا زبلكم حجي لومي نزي functional doctor ولا biomedical practitioner كنركب علينا سقيلنا زي مكترنا خوون يبلون انتايو زودد اليو ناي شنت مرمرة ناي بوبو مرمرة ناي دم مرمرة تجيرو انتاينت supplement يدليو تقبر لهم بس سقيلنا نحنا خن مكرر له أي جب عنا ندبر كله نقدر زي بزعبا therapy زارب كلها ناسي involve كنكون علينا زي ABA parent training علو parent training يقبر لهم كنا جدًا parent training كقبروا لهم زي ABA therapy ما عسينا نقبر parent training دما حتى حد كمية كزسرح زود خمسة قبر كله كمية حجزوا لكن مهارة لنا speech therapy كقبر كله تعطون لكم مسؤوم قالي عيتون يوم سدرابي تعيتون يوم اندحري لهم مخم أوكي فيديو غيركم مريوني انتهيكم كمية غيركم يخون تحجزوا كلها ترابيتا نسخاتكم involve كتقونا لكم زي أبي بزح انت يسمع لكم مثلكم سئلهم أبجزامت سلكم يوم تحجزوا ترابيس جلس عند حجزي تكتات الوان كوينكم أبجزاز متون تحركون فيديو غيركم ترأيهم انت يوم يصرحوا دلو بتعمتي أجزاء كي حلفت الترابي effective زقنا كرخبو نحنا كنتقرا لنا كنكتاتلو مع لنا نتوم ترابي دقابرو اوكي زي انا سبلمنت يا قدم تزاريبي اوريدي ناي دايت كنت يرلو مالنا زي حبر دلو مغبيتات زي حبر دلو كنقدفو لنا فيش اويل صبقيو سبلمنتال فيتامينز فيش اويل تزاريبنا لنا ملت فيتامين جن انا قاليهم دك انا سنسيتيف سلازخونو ابتي ناي براكتيشنر كيلا مرمرا كنقبرلو مي زبالت ادبل اوكي نشتي بزعبا بيت تمرت خزارب دللخو بيت تمرتكس زي مبزحتيهم اب امريكا دللخو ناي امريكا يززارب ناي اوروبا بزح يفلطوني جن بزعبا امريكا كاب 3 عامت بيت تمرت دق انا خقبل يوم اتي كمي غيرو ما بيت تمرتي كمز اوتو زي تشايلد فايند بحالالو هجي اب تكساس تشايلد فايند يغبرو توم بيت تمرتيو كاب 3 ابيلون كقبلوهم علوم نزيهم قلت انتن سبيشال نيدز دلوهم ولا اوتيزم ولا كالي داون سيندروم سبيشال نيد كاب 3 جميرون سان 21 years old كقبلوهم كمهروهم علوهم ግን ክቕበልዎም ካብ 3 እንድሕር ክንቅበሎም ክቕበሉና ክሕግዞም ኢቫሉዌሽን ክግበረሎም ኣሎ እታ ኢቫሉዌሽን በደንብ ገይሮም አረዲኦምና ከምዚ ገርና ናይ ኦቲዝም ኢና ናይ ስፒች ኢና ከምዚ ንገብርሎም ናይቶም ስፔሻሊ ተኣኪቦም ነቶም ቆልዑ ትሪኦም እዚ ወዲ ኦቲዝም ኣለዎ ኢሎም እንታዮም ትገብሩ IEP ወጻሉ IEP ማለት ኢንዲቪጁዋል ኤጁኬሽን ፕላን እዛ ማለት እዚ ወዲ ስፒች የድልዮ ስለ እንድሕር ኮይኑ እንታይ ኢና ነምህሮ ኣብ ስፒች ካልእ ነገር ናይ እንደ ዓበዩ ናይ ትምህርቲ እንድሕር ኮይኑ እንታያ ጎል ይጽሕፉሉ እዮም ኣብቲ ኣኬባ ኸውፍ ኢልና ንሕና ምስኦም ንዛረብ ኢና ንሕና ኣርድ ሚቲንግ ኢና ንብሎ ኣብ ቴክሳስ ኣብ ካልእ ግን IEP ሚቲንግ እዮም ድብልዎ ኩሎም ተኣኪቦም እዚ እንታይ ዓይነት ሓገዝ ይደልዮ እዚ ንሳን ንሕና ድማ ክንሳተፍ እንታይ ክንገብረሉ እንታዮም ዘሸግረኩም ኣብ ገዛ በዚ ሁሉ ጎል ይጽሓፍ ኦኬ እታ ጎል ተጻሒፋ እቶም መማሕራን እታ ጎል እንዳከታተሉ እዮም ድሰርሑ በብግዚኡ ድማ ፕሮግረስ ሪፖርት ይሰዱልና እታ ፕሮግረስ ሪፖርት መሰደዱና ክንሪኢ ኣለና ብምንታይ ጎል እዮም ሰሪሖም ክንደይ መሓሹለው ፓርቲሲፔት ክንገብር ኣለና ምስቶም መማሕራን كل ساعة كنراقب علينا مالت every day نوت كتصحفولنا اللو من دحر زي تصحفولنا كوينهم ولا بخونا كم يزفلت كم تقبر زودي إلا كنسقوم كنزارب علينا دكتورون إلوون يروق قدم أسترقامي زسترقم الناسب كنقبر علينا قانقوا زين الزارب ندحر كوينا صبو غيرنا إذن هاي بيت مرتب قانقوا على مفليد بلد regular English አይኮን እናቶም ኣለዎም words that are confusing ክንፈልጦ ለና እንታይ ምኳኑ እዚ ናይ ዘስተርጉመልና ሰብ ሒዝና እንድሕር ዘይ ተረዳእና ከመይ ጌርና ኢና ንፍርመሎም ክርዳእና ኣለዎ እንታይ ኢሎም ከም ዝዛረቡ እንታይ ዓይነት ነገር ከም ዝግበረሉ ካልእ ድማ ሕጂ ምሽ ኣብቲ ክላስሩም ከይድና ቪዚት ክንገብር ኣለና ገሊኦም ስቴት ሰማዕ ኣለኹ ኣይፈቅዱን እዮም ቪዚት ክንገብር ግን ፊልድ ትሪፕ ክኸዱ ከለዉ ክንከይድ ንኽእል ኢና ምሳሕ ድማ ምስ ደቅና ክንበልዕ ንኽእል ኢና ስኢልና እንድሕር ዘይንሳተፍ ዘይንሪኦም ኮነ ድላዮም እዮም ዝገብሩ ግን ንሕና ክንከታተሏን ኩሉ ዝብለኩም ደለኹ ስድራ ቤት ኩሉ ስራሕ ክከታተል ኣለዎ ኣብ ቤት ትምህርቲ ቮለንቲር ክግበር ከኣል እንድሕር ኮይኑ ቮለንቲር ግበሩ እቶም መማሕራን ትርእይዎም እቶም ኤድስ ትርእይዎም እንድሕር ይርኦኩም እቶም ቲቸር when they see you at school respect እዮም ዝገብሩኹም ደቅኹም ፅቡቅ ገይሮም እዮም ዝርእዩ ሪስፖንስብል ክኾኑ እዮም እዚኣ ብጣዕሚ ኢምፖርታንት ነገር እያ ፓርቲሲፔት ክትገብሩ ኣለኩም ሓደ ነገር ድማ ብዛዕባ ኦቲዝም ክዛረብ ደለኒ እዚ ሴፍቲ ብጣዕሚ ደቅና ዋንደር ገብሩ እዮም ዴንጀር ኣይፈልጡን እዮም ካልእ ድማ ማይ ይፈትዩ ሕምብሱ ብጣዕሚ እዮም ዝደልዩ ንምንታይ ሴንሰር እዩ ኣነ ኦቲዝም ዘለዎ ቆልዓ ማይ ዘይፈቱ ኣይፈልጥኒ ኩሎም ይፈትዎ እዮም እንድሕር ማይ ደላታ ስዊሚንግ ፑል ወላ እንድሕር ሪኦም ክረኽብዋ እዮም እታ ማዕፆ እንድሕር ተኸፊታ ዝከታተሎም እንድሕር ከይሉ ክረኽብዋ እዮም 50% of children wonder autism ዘለዎም 50% ካብ ገዛ ወፂኦም ፈልጡ እዚ statistics ገይረ እንትን
Leah, you went muted, Leah. Hit the unmute for yourself. There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I mute a while ago or?
No, just that one, like 2 seconds before I started talking.
Okay, this is so important, I have to say. So, بزعبا wandering and drowning بتاعمي important you كنقدسلو لنا أنا منتاي we think it might not happen عناسي دك أنا دا نرئيو منا قلن بالجن قاشامت ولا بكون بوتات خدو سلازي وانا نجاريو دكهم نايزي wandering فيديو صريحنا لنا بتقرينيا انتاي كم زقبر تاجيو كدانهم دقبر نجارالو بزح نجارالو واندر تقبرو قلت هذا نودين اشتي خلو وتصني ما تصون حتى خفيت وتصن كم زي اي واتش نيراتو نستا واتش مسكبرا دقه مسوصه تندحر خو يلو كيدو الارم تقبرنا سو نفلط انا ندحر وصي سو نسا كم عينت ነገር ብዙ አለው እንጂ ቴክኖሎጂ ማ ካብ ቀደም ብዙ ነገር አለው በጣም ኢምፖርታንት ካለ ድማ ስዊም ለሰን ዋተር ሴፍቲ ስዊም ለሰን ድባሃላሎ بتعمي important خونت يا بسيت ستيتكم علو اندحر ديالو organization علو دخفلو لكم دقكم كم محارو overnight ايكونن دقنا غزي وسدوم يو سويم لسن كم محارو من البات 3-4 عامت وسدوم خون ግን كنمهرو مالنا at least اب ماي اتيوم survive كغبر كخلو لوم زي بتعمي انتي نبلكم علخو اندحر بزي تات حاجز تدلو خوينكم ناتي انفورميشن كبكو مچرشا زي ادما بتعمي دو فتوا سلايدنا يا انتاي دبل زي دقناسي اندبندنت كنغبرو مالنا كل ነገር نحنا كات كنغبرلهم يبلان كل ነገር نحنا اندحر نغبرلهم كوينا انتاي اندمحرو نحنا صبو غيرنا خم نغبرو يوم دمحرو بر بعلم كغبرو كم زلو ما يفلطونو زي بناتنا كالتشر كل ነገር انا بعليني اشتدق ايدق كل ነገር كبلعهم ككدانهم كغبرلهم يددل ግን ኢንዲፔንደንት ሆኑለው እንደዚህ አክሰራሐላለና ካለ ድማ ነት ፊውቸር ምስ አበዩን ታይ ከገብረሎም ከለና መጀመርታይና ፕላን ከገበረደለና ከም ዝበልኩኹም ኢንዲፔንደንት ክንገብሮ ካለ ድማ እንታይና አብቲ ስቴትና ደሎ ፕሮግራማት ክንፈልጦለው በብስቴት ይፈላለዩ ሜዲኬድ ይፈላለዩ ሜዲኬድ ዌቨር ይፈላለዩ ንስና አብዘለናዩ ስቴት እጂ አብና ዘለና 17 ዓመትና ንጽበይ ግን ደቅና ኢሚዲየትሊ ሬጅስተር እንድሕር ገይሮ ሃይ ስኩል ኩ ድኸሎ ክረኽብዋታ ዌቨር እንታይ እንድሕር ኢልኩም ዌቨር ማለት ሓገዝ እዩ ሕጂ ወደይ ዌቨር ኣለዎ بيت كسرح زخيل أنا ويفر سلزلوا مت اللون مساعد سرحو أب ثيرابي وسدوه أب سويمين وسدوه أب هورس باك وسدوه زد ليونا قري قبرولو اندحر زي ويفر دينا برتني عم مسقوخو لالن كسرح لن بر بيت مرت ودي له سران حدا مسكونه تودي على بيت مرتي سلز زي ويفر جن كزحق زناي هل إدما بزعباناي financial planning كزارة بدلي لهو special need trust بحلالو able account بحلالو السون تايو جنزب كما يجرنان سيف كم دقابرلو كل نجار ويفر اي كفلونيو اي سلازي خفلو جنزب كن سيف كم دقابرلو معلنا ندقنا بزيتات كله عم هيرنا لنا ندحر حاجس دليهم ابتن يوتيوب علنا بيوتيوبنا كله علو ندحر دما حطو لكم انا I'm available ناتيك اتركه بكم كالي ناي ستيت كوم دلو developmental disability service كتراخبوا لكم ولا كفلت بزعباكم كفلتوا إذا أدقكم كفلتوا لهم نمنتاي بستيت كم فلاليون هنا بزح عامة نتبينا قال يوم ستيت كم كاليفورنيا مينيسوتا قلت فيهم زويفر دحبوكم صبوا غيركم كت دقكم كتحجزوا بتر حاجة زوحابكم كتحجزوا تقولوا سلازقونكم please no كال إدما guardianship تبع النجار لا guardianship مالت انتايو دك أنا ساعات نشتغل زلوك صار 18 guardian automatically سدرايبيتيو guardian مش جينا حسبت شمون تخونو قلو ناتهم guardianو كم قالوا دك أنا بعلم decide كم يقولوا قالوا دك أنا أبي كلش كاتو قلو ناتو ساتهم يوم دمبر ناتنا أنا information هيبونانهم كويو كم قيدوا ما زوم special تخونو دك أنا قاليهم guardianship يدليهم قاليهم كلهم ما يكونوا زي ليفل 1 تخونوا بعلهم تكير قبرون دحر كوينهم نحجزهم guardianship كنوسد أي جبعاني نقولهم حجي حدا ودي mild autism دلوا ناي بعلو guardian وكن نحجزوينا حدا نقدر دحر كوينو وخ تناي أكاديمي كنا نحجزهم بر guardian أيكوننا نجن تودي بزو حاجة زدليو guardianship أكورت كيدنا أستشو عتا مسكونة تبروسس جميرنا أستشو مونتا مسكونة ودنا أندر أسيو نحنا هنا بحكمنا نحركينا guardianship يوم دبلونا حجي حاجة بناي سيرجري قال ندحراد لي هو نسوخ في الرمى يكلوني من تاي ردوني لأن نحنا guardian سلزخونا بأن نحنا هو ترديونا له نحنا guardian ناي كورت دوكيمنت نرئيهم guardianship سلزلنا كنفرم له نخلينا اوكي زي بزعما ستيغما خلا زاربا نغريا ستيغما بتغرينيا انتي مخانا افلت كوان مالت سب انتي خلني مالت يمسلني سو سب بزح نغر نعثنا كوميتي حزاتنا الله سب كيفلت أنا إلا حاجة زي نقبر له مال سب كيفلت أنا جزا خوفي لنا إنه وصل أبيت كريستيان كون أب كوميتي أي نوت أو مال لنا زيجن صبوق دخلنا نقول إنه أو من صبوق عيون نعناون نحنا ايسوليت نخون كابت كوميتي نانوت كال دما دك أنا دما استيغما حيزونا حاجة دايجنوسيس عندنا ندحرلنا كال سب ليبل أي تقبروهم دكهم قال ندحرلهم كون ندحرلكم دقهم يوم سافر دقبرو لونج ترم مساتهم يوم تجزين دحر حليفهم جاي أنا ناتي مخرج غبكم ندحر دقهم أوتيزم علىهم نقول له تزا نقروهم نتوم سدرابيت نتوم your friends كله ودي أوتيزم علىه بقى السان دحريلا كان حبه كيف لت ترابي كمت زوز عيد لينا سلازي ناي بحق إتا حق أزخونة نجر تزاريبنا لايفون أنا قلنا مثلاً أنا خو إزريو كم زبالكم اندحر حكمنا غيركم توم دكتور بزعباء أوتيزم اندحر زي تزارب وسخاتكم ده حسبكم أرتيلكم اندحر كيركم نسخاتكم كتزاربوا لكم I suspect my child has autism please evaluate he's gonna be okay قال اندحر لكم no evaluation يقبر الكاو it's okay تبلني حجيجن اتي حاكم pediatrician بزحنا autism يفلتونيو I'm sorry pediatricians أبدين دحر لكم جن بزح جيروم كما يجيروم evaluate كم زجبه أبتناي specialist خدوا لهم psychologist علو developmental pediatrician نساتهم يوم كوفيلهم درجة 3-4 ساعات كوفيلهم يوم evaluate تقبلوهم so الساتد اليوم يا سوء اليوم no ندحري لهمنا maybe يبلومن قال إذا mother instinct بحال نجار علو بتعمل عملوا ليه عديتات نفلتين حدا نجار ندحر أنا خوينهم أنا بعلي يفلت إسا آية حكيم يو جن آي دحانيو من دابلني جن قبل بيك مش تفلت يعني مسؤوطة قالي سي آي كجبر لهم علني evaluate كجبروا لهم إلى آي قدف أنا بعلي كجبر لهم إلى جير لهم سلزي ولا سب آيكم ولا people around you ناي medical كونوا نسخاتكم أديتات أو مشتقون دلو instinct بحال نجار له you have to listen to your instinct كال نجار there's joy in the journey كبيديو قليل نجار አይደለም አይኮነን ደቅና ምዕባይ ብዙሕ ነገር ዘጋጥመና ኣሎ ዶክተር ከም ዝበለው ሜዲካል ኮንዲሽንስ ኣለው ሳይኪያትሪክ ኮንዲሽን ኣለው ግን ደቅና እግዚአብሔር አሚኑ ሂቦና ኣሎ ንሕና ሰለብሬት ንግበር ሓደ ነገር እንድሕር ገይሮም ብጣዕሚ ሰለብሬት ክንገብር ኣለና ንምንታይ it's a big thing ንኦም ድማ ድሕሪት ደቅና ከምዚ ላይፍና ጽቡቕ ከምዚ ይኹን ኣይነርእዮም we have to re-celebrate them especially يوم بقوم እግዚአብሔር ፈሪጹ ፈጥሩን አላ አሚኑ ይቡናሎ we have to accept ገለሳ እትናብራና ትምሳና ደለው ስድራ ቤት ወለ እንድሕር ንሳቶም ብሎ we have to change our friends we have to change our family support ገብረና ኣብ support ንአላ ዝሕግዘና ንደቅና ዝቅበል ካብኡና ንኸይድ እንድሕር ትብሉና ሰብኣት ክንድሕር ኣለው we need to leave alone ደቅና ኮምፔር አይንግበሩ every child is unique أنا دك أي compare عند حد غيره يوم نرم متتصللكم نزي قبر every child is unique every child is unique so نايقله ودي خمس غيرو له زي ثيرابي غيراتو له سخجن no زرباتات أنسمع دبس أنتني تقبرونا so it's very important ندكنا celebrate نقبرو there's they're full of joy. Okay, زيون دكتور قالت ولو important organization join ولا ኣብ social media ክትከታተልዎም ዘለኩም ታካ ድበሃሉ ኣለዉ the autism action committee ሳቶም ብዛዕባ biomedical functional ብዙሕ እዮም ዝዛረቡ ቪድዮታት እውን ኣለዎም autism speaks fundraise ገብሩ እዮም ወክ ገብሩ እዮም በብስቴት ካልእ ድማ ብዙሕ ቱልኪትስ ኣለዎም ብዛዕባ ናይ ፊዲንግ ዶ ብዛዕባ ናይ ድቃስ ብዙሕ ሪሶርስ ኣለዎም ናሽናል ኦቲዝም ኣሶሲዬሽን ብዛዕባ ድራውኒንግ ብዛዕባ ኢሎፕመንት ብዙሕ ኢንፎርሜሽን ኣለዎም ቦክስ ኣላቶም በብግዚኡ ዝሰዱልኩም ኢንፎርሜሽን ነው ካልእ ድማ ከመይ ጌርና ገዛና ከም ንዓፁ መፍትሕ ጌርና ገለ ኢንፎርሜሽን ብዙሕ ኣለዎም ናሽናል ኦቲዝም ኣሶሲዬሽን ይበሃሉ ኣርክ ኦፍ ቴክሳስ ኣርክ ኦፍ በብስቴቱ ኣለው ሳቶም ድማ ኣድቮካሲ ብዛዕባ ፖለቲካል ብዛዕባ ሜዲኬድ ሜዲኬር እዚ ሕጂ ዘለዎ ለውጢ ዘሎ ኣድሚኒስትሬሽን ደለው እንታይ ገል ንመኒና ንፅሕፍ ንመኒና ነቶም ኮንግረስማን ክንፅሕፍ ኣለና ንምንታይ እዚ ሓገዝ ደቅና ዝረኽብዎ ደለው ከይወስድዎ ገለ ኢልና ምስኦም ብዙሕ እንትን ኣለዎም ኦቲዝም ሶሳይቲውን ኩሎም ዝገብሩ ሳቶም ናይ ቀደም ሶሳይቲዮም ብዛዕባ ኣድቮካሲ ይሰርሑ እዮም ብዛዕባ ኣዌርነስ ይሰርሑ እዮም Center for Parent Information Resource. እዚኣ ድማ እንታይ እያ በብስቴትኩም ደለው ኢንፎርሜሽን ድህውሉ እዚኣቶም ብዛዕባ IEP ብዛዕባ ኤጁኬሽናል ብዙሕ እዮም ዝገብሩ Okay. ንእሽተይ በዚኣ ናተይ ኦርጋናይዜሽን ክዛረብ ደልየ Reaching Families ኣብ ቴክሳስ እዩ ጀሚርና ኣብ ዳላስ እዩ ጀሚርና ግን ብዙሕ ስቴት ኢና ደለና ኣብ ዋሽንግተን ዲሲ ENC ዝበሃል ዶክተር ዝተዛረቦ ኣዜብ ትበሃል ትመርሖ ግሩፕ ኣለ በጣም ኣክቲቭ እዮም ዲሲ ሜሪላንድ ቨርጂኒያ እዮም ደለው ኣብ ኣትላንታ ኣለና ደንቨር ኣለና ኣብ ካሊፎርኒያ ኣለና በብ ስቴት wherever you are contact me ኣብኡ ደለው ኣዴታት ወላ ቦታት ኣለው ነቲ ግሩፕ ዝሕግዙ ኢንፎርሜሽን ናይ ስቴት እንድሕር ደሊኹም ምስኣቶም ክትራኸቡ ትኽእሉ ኢኹም ካልእ ነገር ድማ ገሊኦም በብወርሒ በብገለ ይራኸቡ እዮም ገሊኦም ስኢሎም ኣብ ቫይበር ኣብ ሶሻል ሚድያዮም ዝኾኑ ንሕና ግን በብወርሒ ንገብሮ ፕሮግራማት ኣለው ብዛዕባ IEP ብዛዕባ ዳውን ሲንድሮም ብዛዕባ ABA ብዙሕ 3-4 ጊዜ ተዛሪብና ኣለና ብዛዕባ ስፒች ቴራፒ ብዛዕባ ባዮሜዲካል ኩሉ ዝኾነ ንሕና ንደቅና ንገብረሉ ነገር ብኡኡ ቀዲሕና ዝገበርናዮ ኣሎ ይቻላል ድበሃል ፕሮግራም ያል እዚኣ በአምሓርኛ I'm sorry እቶም ተቅርቡልና አምሓርኛ እዮም ዝዛረቡ ግን ይቻላል ማለት እንታይ ብዛዕባ ንሕና ክንክእሎ ኢና ማለት እዩ እዚ ጀርኒሲ ከኣልዩ ብዛዕባ ናይ ሲብሊንግ ናይ ትዳር ናይ ሜሬጅ ናይ ዝኾነ ነገር ዘጋጥመና ናይ መሓዙትና ዶ ገለ በዚ ጀርኒሲ ዘጋጥመና ነገር ዲስካስ ንገብረሉ እዩ ዶክተር ጤናይ ጄድ ባል ዶክተር ጤናይ ሳይኮሎጂስት ያ ካውንስሊንግ እንትገብር ያ ካውንስሊንግ ዘድልየኩም እንድሕር ኣለኩም አምሓርኛ ትዛረብ ግን እዚ ኦርጋናይዜሽን ንካውንስሊንግ ከፍል እዩ Okay, self-care. We have to take care of ourselves. አዴታት especially አቦታት ወን ባዕልና take care ክንገብር ኣለና. We want to live as long as possible for our children. ንምንታይ ደቅና ገሊኦም ብዙሕ ሓገ ስለዝደልዩ we have to take care of ንዓና ባዕልና take care እንድሕር ገና ነዊሕ ላፊና ንነብር ንደቅና እውን ግዜ ፅቡቅ ጌርና take care ክንገብሮ ማለት ንባዕልና እውን ንጥዕና የድልየናዩ እንታይና ሰልፍ ኬር ማለት ምናልባት ወክ ምግባር ኮፊልና ለበይና ቡን ምስታይ ወላ ኣብ ስፓ ኸይድና ድማ ሪላክስ ምግባር እዩ ግን ግዜ ወሲድና ስቲ ንባዕልና ቴክ ኬር ክንገብር ኣለና እዚ ኣነ ሪግሬት ትገብራ ነገር እዩ እንታይ ጎይ ነይረ ኩሉ ሰዓት ወላ ንሰብ ክሕግዝ ንደቀይ ክሕግዝ ሕጂ ስማዓንሉ I wish I had taken a break so please ግዜ ወሲድኩም እረፍት ጌርኩም ሰልፍ ኬር ግበሩ نعنا بترحي كون ندقنا كل ساعة مسؤوم ندحر كوينا we're gonna get stressed ግን رف إلا مس مزعنا with full energy ندقنا take care نقبر okay قال إذا أمت أرشاد زبلا مثلني I think it's my last slide قال نقرنا أي بحاجزني ناي بحاج قال أسمح دفعت كوانا قر شيرك مقبر دفعت كوانا قال أسمح حجز كله I feel good. I fought autism today. You know, I just ይብለኒ ንምንታይ ሓደ ኣነ ዘጋጠመኒ ሲ ካልእ ስድራ ቤት ከይሽገር ሓገዝ ሂበዮም so I feel so good እዚኣ ሞክርዋ ዘይትሕግዝ ካልእ ስድራ ቤት ምሕጋዝ ብፋይናንሻል እንድሕር ኮይኑ ብሄልፕ እንድሕር ኣጆኺ ሃፍተይ ኣነ እውን ሓሊፈዮ ኣለኹ ምባል እንድሕር ኮይኑ that's enough ግን we have to reach out ነቶም ካልኦት ድማ ከማና በተለይ ንእሽተይ ቆልዑት ዘለዎም ንሕና እንድሕር ኣብ ሓደ ቦታ በፂሕና ድሓን ኮይና ኩሉ ተቐቢልና ኩሉ ንገብር እንድሕር ኮይና ነቶም ምንኣሳት ድማ ክንሕግዞም ኣለና this is me ናተይ ስልኪ ቁፅረይ እዚ እዩ ቴክስት ግበሩለይ ስልኪ ብዙ ግዜ ኣይልዕልን እየ ግን ስልኪ እንድሕር ቴክስት ጌርኩምለይ ኣፖይንትመንት ክበኩም ፕሪ ኮንሳልቴሽን እህብ እየ እዚኣ ድማ ኢሜይል እያ organization reaching families .org ይበሃል I know I did it very fast ሕቶ እንድሕር ኣለኩም I'm going to be around thank you so much for everyone for EAMA for inviting me Dr. Maria Charur for your passion for our community I thank you so much you and we have been at it for a while I appreciate your patience with me and all the hard work Dr. Mahatma, thank you for your excellent presentation. And kulla khatkum for listening to my rushed, broken Tigrinya. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Leah, so much. Yes, that was a great presentation. Thank you for sharing your personal story and all of those resources. We will go ahead and move to the question and answer section. And we already have a couple comments, so I'm going to get to those. I have been putting in the chat box kind of our information and how to reach us after this presentation. There's a QR code. That QR code will lead you to an inventory form so we can get your email and name and you can keep in contact with us and we'll give you updates through that. There was a first comment, and this was Leah during your presentation when you mentioned how sometimes the physician, is really busy and might not address all of your concerns if you have concerns about your child's development. And someone made a really good comment, which is if your doctor continues to dismiss your concerns, then you have the right to switch doctors. So, and I agree with that. And I just want to highlight that because it is important that your doctor listens to you. Sometimes they might not see the physician, because I can tell you, for me, it is really busy. You get like 15, 20, 25 minutes to see a family. And if you don't see something in that visit, does not mean that there is still not a concern at home. So I thought that was a really good thing that Leah highlighted. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Leah, or anybody else on our panel before we move to our next question? Okay.
I agree.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. And then our first question said, thank you for organizing this. My question is, are there any studies that tells avoiding gluten and dairy products are helping kids with autism? Which vitamin supplements do you recommend? Those two questions there. Which is gluten and dairy products help autism? And then what supplements would you recommend? This can be anyone on our panel.
I can give a quick response to that. There are some studies that show GFCF diet helps children with autism. If you want, I can email it to you. As far as what supplements, as I said, for me, I'm going to say see a practitioner that can help you evaluate your child and then give you the right supplements.
Okay.
I just want to add to that there's a special type of folic acid that crosses into the brain that some clinicians are prescribing. It's called folinic acid. So ask your provider and your physician about that if it's the right choice for your child.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a leucovorin. That there's a lot about that on social media these days.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Matme, you want, you're muted. Dr. Slase. There.
Okay, so if I may add to the suggestions made, I don't think there are any specific studies that may show clear evidence, but in terms of, how gluten-free diet may help, but there are anecdotes. A lot of parents resort to gluten-free diet. In some cases, there may be lactose intolerance, and some kids would be better off avoiding lactose. When it comes to supplements, it may be advisable to have multivitamins, vitamin D, melatonin for kids who may have insomnia or sleep disturbances, also magnesium glycinate at a low dosage may be helpful with some kids in terms of insomnia and anxiety. There are, individuals who don't metabolize folic acid to L-methylfolate. There's an enzyme called MTHFR where there's maybe some deficiency. So like Dr. Maria said, there's a specific type of folic acid called L-methylfolate. So L-methylfolate is a product of the folic acid metabolism by MTHFR. So that definitely will pass the blood-brain barrier and may be helpful for some kids.
Very good, thank you. And one thing that I see in a lot of my patients is those who are picky eaters or not eating a full diet. They could become iron deficient from the autism or from other kind of developmental disorders. So that's something else to bring up with your primary care doctor, is if your child's not eating a very diverse diet, fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, to kind of check him or her for iron deficiency. Another question was from Rahel. She said, thank you all. And this one was for Dr. Mahtme, that you stated that vaccines don't cause autism. A lot of parents state their son or daughter was speaking up to 18 to 24 months of age. What can you clarify on that age group?
This is an excellent question, and then a question that comes up at any events or programs that I have participated. It is true that kids tend to show the signs and symptoms at this age, and that happens to happens to also be the time where children do get their most frequent vaccinations. So it may appear to be correlated, but in my opinion, there is no evidence or no studies to suggest that there is a direct linkage or connection. I mean, in medicine, the threshold is high to prove cause and effect. So I don't think that has been reached. But I'm also open, if you will, for any studies that will specifically study this issue in a scientific way, just like any others will be conducted. So I welcome and I'll be open to see any other studies, but to this date I haven't seen any to directly link, but they happen to occur when the kids are receiving their vaccinations. That I believe is the reason why people believe that. And plus there was a data that came out from a falsified studies, I believe it was in the 70s in the UK, with a publication on the Lancet from a British gastroenterologist who falsified the data and printed an article correlating vaccinations and autism spectrum disorder, which was eventually proven to be wrong, and the article has been removed. So there is some misinformation that came from there.
Thank you. Any other comments from our panelists before we move on to another question? This one doesn't have to deal with autism, and you can answer this briefly, Dr. Mahtme, is how do you identify if your adult kid has depression, especially if their social life is limited? I know that's not the focus of our presentation.
That's no problem. We will take any opportunity to discuss any issues that may impact our community, and will be delighted to do so. I guess, how do you diagnose or how do you figure out if an adolescent has depression or not? I mean, depression is sometimes a word or a term we use loosely to describe sadness, but that's not what depression is or clinical depression is. Clinical depression has different sets of signs and symptoms, and the most important variable here is to what extent it impacts one's level of functionality and or how or to what extent it impacts one's level of enjoyment in life vis-a-vis where you would expect the individual to be. So It has persistent signs and symptoms of depressed mood or irritability for a period of time. There are sleep disturbances. There are symptoms that are associated with our physical well-being that are impaired. That could be in energy, appetite, weight. One may start or sound to be increasingly negative, the way they think about themselves, their surroundings, or life. They may have signs of hopelessness and helplessness, and more worsening or more worrisome signs can be any thoughts or intents of self-harm, if you will.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question about a son with speech delay, and he's a picky eater. And it states that they put them in food therapy, but it does not seem to be helping. Do you have any suggestions? So I know Leah kind of talked about those resources.
Okay, well, I will try to answer these questions. So one would have to look globally, what are the other signs and symptoms they have, how old they are, have they gone through the screening for their child in terms of nutritional assessments. This is something Leah had mentioned. Unfortunately, in the conventional medical profession that you and I belong to, Abeba, there is not an emphasis of referring individuals for nutritional assessment or evaluation. So there is what we call sensory integration, which is at a higher rate in children with autism, but it also happens in children without autism. And these are children who have high level of sensitivity to noise, smell, texture of the clothing material, kids who can't even keep the name tags on their clothing. They are sensory seeking. They tend to be, slouching and sometimes, rubbing against certain textures. They also have some texture-related sensitivity to food. They tend to like crunchy food instead of mushy foods. So getting some nutrition assessment may be important, also to make sure they're not deprived or they don't fall behind their nutritional needs. I don't recall the other part to the question.
That was good. And then the parent clarified the child is 7 years of age. So a couple, like I mentioned before, I usually try to make sure that they're not iron deficient. Our speaker said to put them on a multivitamin, which I agree. And then as far as kind of speech therapy, I know you might not see progress in the beginning. I usually try to tell families, wait 4 to 6 weeks to see if you see any improvement. Sometimes parents get frustrated because they'll go 1 or 2 times to speech therapy and not see any improvement. The other thing is try to have consistency with all the parents on what the diet is going to be for the child. Sometimes one parent does one thing and the other might do another. So then the child's not getting consistency of what they should eat. Another thing that I recommend is introducing like one new food per week or every other week, right? So that you can kind of gradually introduce new things into the diet. If you try to do something like 3 to 4 times, like 3 to 4 different things in 1 week, that might not work for a child who's already a picky eater. So those are some of my suggestions. Yep.
I'm going to add one quick thing to that. There's different methods of feeding therapy. So that feeding therapist might not be meeting your child's need. Sometimes it's good to get, after you've tried, to another feeding therapist, but the nutritional assessment is really important. Which you said, everything, but in addition to that, sometimes there are different techniques. So you might want to go see somebody else.
Yeah. Yep. Let me go ahead and move on because there's some other questions coming through. Thank you, Leah. The next one is, what would you say causes a lot of kids with autism to regress at around 2 years of age instead of being nonverbal from the beginning or never had eye contact? So this is a broad question, and like our presentation said earlier, there's mild, moderate, severe. There's different levels of autism. So it can be very hard to pinpoint one thing. But any comments from our speakers on that question? Do you want me to read it again?
Can you read it again?
Okay, yes, I can. What would you say causes a lot of kids with autism to regress at 2 years of age instead of being nonverbal from the very beginning or never had eye contact? I'm thinking maybe what are some things that could cause autism around 2 years of age besides nonverbal and not having eye contact? What are some other things at 2 that could manifest as autism?
We consider that regressive autism. And I think, I think the scientific literature, Dr. Charur also said, is there's genetic and there's an environmental piece. What that environmental piece, we're not sure. My thoughts about vaccine is a little different, Dr. Mahatemes. There are a subgroup of children that regress after vaccination. But I'm not saying every child with autism is vaccine injured, but there is a subgroup of children. I think we need to look at those better, those children. But I do know also children that are not vaccinated who have autism. So to me, the vaccine question is not 100% answered. I'm not telling people not to vaccinate their kids, but I think we need to space it out sometimes. And if we have an older child with that has regressed after vaccination, I think when we have the next child, we need to do it differently. And now this is not the opinion of this organization. I know I am sure of that, but that's my experience. So there might be. I don't know, Dr. Charur, do you have some suggestions of what other things?
Yeah, I think there are, as you mentioned, Leah, some types of autism that are regressive. So I can give one example of a specific genetic condition. It's called Rett syndrome or MACP2 related conditions. The gene is called MACP2. And in these conditions, actually, the children, oftentimes females, because the gene is on the X chromosome, they start out developing perfectly fine up to the around 2 years of age when they start regressing severely. So there are different genetic forms of autism that have a regressive component to them, but those are pretty rare as well.
Yep. And
if I may, though, Abeba, just to add, I don't think I'm going to say anything new, but just like we know fully what the causes of autism are for individuals, that is, I don't think we know the causes for even individuals who do regress at age 2 or the other age. So it's multifactorial, just like any other causes of autism. So I don't think we can specifically identify the reason for these kids who show regression.
Thank you. Any idea on how to convince community or family members, especially Habesha people, that they need exposure or seek medical help for autistic kids soon to be turning adults? Because most of our community does hide it and does not seek help and expect for a miracle overnight. So, Leah, you brought up some really important topics for especially the Habesha community that doesn't know how to process like a diagnosis or a neurodevelopmental condition. So any things that you've told families specifically on this topic? You want me to read it again? I can read it. Yeah.
Okay, what I tell families how important early intervention is. We can't go back. And having the autism diagnosis did not negatively affect the child's future. Some of the things that parents or in our committee believe is if your child is diagnosed with autism, then he's not going to be able to do this, he's not going to go to college, he's not going to be included in school. That's not true. As far as in school being in a self-contained classroom or a classroom only for children with autism, those are for kids that are not able to be included. The law in America is to include kids as much as possible. So that's one of the reasons I see a lot of families not wanting their kids being diagnosed as well. He's going to be with the special ed kids. But that's not true for all children. The other thing is we have to get them ready for their adult life. We're not going to be alive forever. These kids are going to need the services like we spoke about, the waiver programs. Without having that diagnosis, nobody's going to give you waiver programs. Nobody's going to give you the support that the child needs. And it is so important for us to advocate so they can get help. Keeping them at home, hiding them from someone harms them. because they're not able to get out of the community. I know some kids that are not able to leave the home because we haven't done the work of getting out in the community. Now I know parents tell me that, oh, people look at me, people say, in our community, they say in all kinds of things like that. What we do, I tell parents, is we have to teach our community how to react to our children. If we don't, they don't know how to act. We wouldn't have known if we didn't have these kids. So we have to do the work. I mean, I know I'm putting a lot on the parents, but the community is actually ready in some ways to accept our kids. The churches are calling me and saying, how could we help these kids? What should we do? And we as the parents have to go to our churches and say, we need a space for our child. Our child needs this kind of support. How can you help me? I'm going to be part of the solution, but help me get there. Letting our friends know. I mean, hiding from our friends. These are our friends. We need to let them know what our life is like. The community, please accept these children. If there's people in the community, accept them, find them space. When we see a kid misbehave at church or anything, let's not rush to say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that to the parents. You don't know what that child has. Kids with autism look typical. They don't have the genetic dysmorphic features, we saw it, but the different features, like kids with Down syndrome, my son is the handsomest boy on earth, but he has severe autism. So since we don't know the community, let's not judge and say things to our parents that would be hurtful to them. So I think we all have to work together to find space and inclusion for our children.
If I may add to it shortly, Ababa. So the way our community approaches autism is very similar to the way we approach, generally speaking, medical conditions. We tend to be in denial, okay? We tend to avoid doctor's visits, even the adults, because, there is this saying in Tigrinya, meaning, what are they going to find in me? And if you remember, in one of the events we did jointly at the festival, there was a question from a young adult Eritrean: what can we do to change our parents' perception about going and getting help? So we tend to be in denial. There is a need to accept, every Eritrean individual, since we're talking mainly here in the United States, knows someone whose children or somebody whose child has autism. Okay, I don't think there is an exception. I have done some, community service and work with the church I belong to, an Eritrean church here in the DC area. And we started doing it because we did see the kids coming to a Sunday school having developmental disabilities. And the teachers were saying, we do see these tendencies, and we put in effort, and there was some response. But by and large, the response we get from our community, if you will, vis-a-vis the prevalence rate, is not as expected. We ought to continue having events like this one. We ought to translate materials in our language for people to reach out. And we ought to encourage open conversations like the one we have and provide them service and support so they can advocate on behalf of their children, get the services early on, and have even a longer lasting support, like Leah and I said, through the autism waiver, which is their right, by the way. They're not doing them any favors. This is their right. So they can go and advocate on their children's behalf.
Thank you. I did put in the syndrome that Dr. Maria mentioned, and it was mentioned a couple times in the presentation, Rett syndrome. So I have it there in the chat box so families can read about it on their own later. There is a couple more questions that we will like to get to. So one of them is, first of all, thank you so much. And my question is, we are newcomers, and they've been here only 6 months, it looks like. My son is 5 years old and diagnosed in January with autism spectrum disorder, and they changed his school to 3 hours from full time. So it looks like he was full-time pre-K, but then went down to 3 hours, has not gotten speech therapy yet. So what steps should that parent make?
Okay, I'm gonna ask this person to give me a call. I'll
Okay.
consult with them because there's more to it than what they're giving us. I would love to help this parent.
Okay, great, thank you. There is another question here. Are there common GI conditions, so stomach and conditions linked to autism? We have a GI consult coming up for my autistic daughter. What should I ask at the appointment?
And I
This
add
would,
okay, go
this
ahead.
would be for Abeba, the pediatrician, Tulia.
Well, the most common thing that I see in children who have autism, they're picky eaters and they can have constipation. So we try to have like increased fiber in their diet, or sometimes you have to do a medication like Miralax, but that should be discussed with either the GI doctor or your primary care physician. So I'm not sure what specific other problems this child might have, but that's what I usually recommend first.
I would love to add reflux
Yeah.
for our kids that are nonverbal.
Yep.
They usually do not tell you they're hurting. Usually they're biting. Dr. Bowie, I don't know if you know him, a known GI specialist in the Boston area. He looks at the mom's hands, how much she bit her or scratched her to see if the child might have reflux because they're not able to explain that their stomach hurts. So reflux is something that
Mm-hmm.
kids that are not growing fast, eating well, that's something that I usually recommend.
Yep. And reflux is essentially like heartburn. So, and you
Yeah.
can have medications either through your GI doctor or through your primary care physician. The other thing I would suggest is making sure the growth charts are okay for your child. So, again, I don't know why they're seeing GI, but making sure there's no issues with the child's growth and height.
Yes.
So, yeah. I hope that answers your question. And let me see, the next question is there any meeting or training available for parents to assist with speech therapy so the parents can assist their child at home? So home interventions, I think.
Okay, so speech therapy can be delivered at school for one thing, in the clinic or in home. In school, they usually will not let you observe all the time, but you can have a session where you can watch the speech therapist provide services for your child. And home, they're coming to your home, you should be sitting in there and watching your child. And number three, if there is in a clinic based, some clinics do not allow you to go in, but most do. If they don't, what I used to say is videotape it for me so I can do the same. I can learn how to do it. We do have maybe 2 or 3 videos on speech therapy on our YouTube if you are interested.
And then under the age of 3, we have early on in the state of Michigan, which is like speech therapy and occupational therapy that can come to the house, and they come once a week, or they state how much they need to come. But that's offered in the state of Michigan up for the child from up until 36 months of age or 3 years of age. So actually, I was thinking about the GI question, any GI diseases linked to autism. I don't think that there's anything like Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease that I've heard of. I don't know if anybody else has on the panel that's linked to autism.
I mean, the most common one is
Yeah.
constipation and irregular bowel habits, I believe it is, and that may be largely related to the diet, the restricted diet they have.
Right.
So that's my experience. I don't know if Leah wants to add.
I think constipation is very common,
Right.
but we can see constipation because the kid is not going often, but the reflux is what I worry a lot about. And then the food sensitivity, you did mention that, doctor, but food sensitivity and allergies is something also that we really need to look into.
Okay, so another question. Why don't we know the exact cause of autism despite having such advanced technology capabilities? Like, why is it still unknown? Dr. Maria.
Yeah. I would say we know a lot more now than we did 10 years ago.
Okay.
So we know that there are specific genetic forms. We know that some genetic mutations cause this. We know exactly what they are. For Rett syndrome, for example, I use that as a frequent example because it's a very severe form and the genetics has been known for a while now, but there are finally clinical trials for Rett syndrome, and there are some treatments that are being tested. So I think we do know a lot, and it is advancing faster than than it used to. But given how complex it is, and the organ that's affected, the brain, is not easily accessible. Like, for example, in cancer, you can access the tumor in most cases. But, given the complexity of the brain and the brain development and function, and these are like higher cognitive functions that are affected, I think that's why. And now we know, for example, that because the genetics is so complex, that it's super rare. Each of these different genetic subtypes are super rare. So it will take a lot more to find additional causes. Yeah.
So even though there's a lot of unknowns still, we know a lot more than we did 10, 15 years with autism and other disorders.
We're heading in the right direction. Hopefully we will continue to head in the right direction.
And get more information for families and things like that. So, okay, I'm going to go to a couple, just like 2 or 3 more questions. I mean, I know that everybody has a lot of good questions coming up, but I just want to be respectful of everybody's time tonight. I see a question about, do autistic kids, when they become adults, develop more issues like seizures or anything chronic that you would want to let people know about?
I think the majority of cases with seizures tend to occur or happen during childhood, but that's not to say it cannot happen at any given time. The manifestation of other comorbid conditions that we've stated, like emotional, whether it's anxiety, OCD, mood disorders, can happen at any given time. In many ways, the one take home that we've been emphasizing by and large is the need for early intervention, early diagnosis, early intervention. That will, likely improve the outcome, if you will, or the trajectory of the different outcomes, whether it's socially, emotionally, physically, educationally. But I'm not aware of, unique circumstances or conditions that may appear in adulthood. Depending on where the individuals are on the spectrum, they can, transition into independent adulthood, self-sustaining. Some may need different degrees of support, whether it's a group home or assisted living. So it depends on the individual. But I would like to hear Leah's thoughts.
Okay. You mentioned seizures. We see seizures in children or adults with autism in puberty. There's a peak of seizures that we do see during puberty. And some of the psychiatric conditions, we tend to see them in adulthood. Wouldn't you say, Doctor?
I mean, fewer will emerge in adulthood. I think the majority would be in childhood and adolescence, Leah. But in adulthood, depending on where they are, you may see psychiatric disorders that seem to be, in some ways perhaps unrelated to the autism if they emerge in the adult population.
Okay, we'll get to the last 2 questions we'll get to, and then we can share information afterwards in the chat box. There's been 3 questions about speech delay and not progressing, so we can lump that in. There's one chat comment here in the chat box. My child is 3 years of age and with autism in Canada, speech delay, and even getting some speech therapy, and the speech is not progressing. Any recommendations that you have? Also, if you know anything of the Canadian health system, treatment, anything that you can offer for advice. And then there's 2 or 3 other comments about just like speech delay, not progressing. We kind of touched on that earlier, but how was that?
On the Canada question, please connect with me. There's 2 groups in Canada that I can connect you with, a very strong group, both one in Toronto and one is somewhere in Alberta, but there's an active group that can really help you. So you do have my number, or should I keep giving my number? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, we can, at the end, we can have you put up your
Okay.
screen, your contact information again, and then
Okay.
people can take a photo of it with their phone.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And then there is some stigma around getting the parents getting their child to speech therapy and things like that. So kind of some conversation around that with the parents and the stigma stigma around treatment. So the key thing from this presentation is early intervention does help them. So even if there is stigma attached to it, and it might be hard for that parent to accept, to keep in mind that the earlier you get them into therapy services, the better their outcome will be.
Yeah.
Withholding them actually puts them more behind. And Leah emphasizes quite a bit too. So
Yeah. And for those that are hesitant to get speech therapy looks like the adult is playing with your child. They bring different toys, try to get them motivated, try to get them to do. It's more of a play-based, especially in the early years, it's much play-based therapy. So it's more enjoyable for the kids than they're not punishing them, they're not yelling at them, they're just playing with them to get more speech going. So maybe the stigma might be around other people knowing your child is getting speech therapy. You got to get over that. Your kid needs it. If your child needs it, you've got to get it. It doesn't matter what aunt thinks or grandma thinks. We just need to get our kids. We are responsible. If we open doors and close doors for our kids, we've got to open it. There's so many services available. So let's use it, because having received speech therapy does not hold them behind. Just because our kids got speech therapy doesn't mean in school they're going to be held behind. It's just additional service to help them.
yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, the harm is in denying the service. There is no harm in getting speech and language therapy for the kids who are in need of therapy or any other form of therapy. Unfortunately, the harm comes from the denial of the acceptance of the condition and the denial of the service. This is what we ought to emphasize. Unfortunately, this, as minor as it may seem, it's a major hindrance in achieving and getting the proper service and care for the kids that need them.
Okay. We still have a lot of people, so if we could get a couple more questions, I knew this would happen, but thank you guys for your time and patience. There's a question about toilet training, and I'll just kind of give you a couple pointers there. They asked about a 4.5-year-old about toilet training. One thing is, seeing what their bowel movement habits are. If they're constipated, then a lot of kids at that age try to avoid going to the bathroom because it hurts, so it causes a cycle. So you want to address the constipation, introducing high fiber foods, having times during the day where they have to sit on the toilet for like 3 to 5 minutes, giving positive rewards, whether, something healthy, like a healthy snack or something like that. And then having consistency amongst all of the parents, caregivers, grandparents about the toilet time. So those are the high points that we typically offer for families. And then there's a question about
And hold on, Ababa, maybe Leah, can you speak of ABA's role in helping with toilet training?
Wow. Toilet training is my thing. All my kids are toilet trained. The families that I support, toilet training is key, because we got to do it when they're young. The older they get, the harder to toilet train. And we can toilet train pretty much every child. If your child receives ABA therapy, they should be involved in helping you train your child. It is usually for our kids with autism, it's going to be intensive. Mom might have to take 2 weeks off from work because we might have to take them to the bathroom every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's going to be intensive, but when the kids are ready, it's going to happen. School can actually help you toilet train, because school should write academic as well as functional goals. Functional goals include toilet training. So you could ask, if your kid is not getting ABA therapy, you can ask the school to work with you, train you. They should provide you the training, and they should be able to train your child. You have more questions? Connect with me. We have a couple of videos, by the way, on toilet training. I think one might be in Tigrinya. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But Salam Hagos, a BCB in the Virginia area, did the training, and she does speak Tigrinya. So if it's not, I'm going to have her do one in Tigrinya.
Thank you. There's a question, does the organization, I think our organization, EAMA, work with entities back home to help autistic kids in Eritrea? I don't, our organization does not. We might do that in the future. We're growing and developing. I don't know of anything in the US that helps specifically autistic kids in Eritrea. But I put my email there, so if you want to connect with me and we can discuss further offline. So if you want to email at eryamericanmedicalassociation@gmail.com. Okay, somebody's asking to please share the video link. So what's the best way, Leah, for that?
For my video?
I think with the toilet training one that you were just talking about.
Okay, can you, we have if you look Reaching Family, we have a YouTube page or YouTube, whatever, and there's like 40, 50 videos that we have. The elopement one I know is in Tigrinya, but most of them are in English or Amharic. But if you need something, and I'm trying to get more Tigrinya videos, and maybe Dr. Matem's Tigrinya is really good. I'm going to grab him and do something with him. And then some other ones. My Tigrinya is not good, I'll be honest.
I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was really good. I thought you did a great job.
My friends are texting me, yeah, you did good. You're surprised.
You did great.
You did really good. Okay. So I'm going to just let one person from the audience unmute themselves. Mike, can you unmute Yurga? She said she had a question.
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Yes.
I didn't join from the beginning. I just want to say thank you, everyone. This is very important topic. I have got a child, 19 years old. His name is Paulos. So I just want to ask about epilepsy. What is the connection between autism and epilepsy? Because my son was starting when he was 15 years. Now he is 19. So what is the connection? Because they didn't get anything in his brain. They say everything is clear, MRI. So what is the connection? Thank you.
Wow, that's an excellent question. Thanks for your participation, Yurga. So, I mean, how we define individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders is by defining them as neurodiverse. Neurodiverse mean that their function of their brain, and not necessarily the structure of the brain, is different to make that distinction from individuals who don't have those conditions, or we call them neurotypical, that is, okay? So seizure is a neurological disorder that is characterized by a spontaneous electrical activity of the brain cells, okay? So it's an excitability of the nerve cells. And the correlation is likely the fact that having a neurodiverse brain in terms of functionality probably puts individuals on this disorder at a higher risk of having other neurological condition, including seizure disorder. Just like there is also a higher rate, for example, of intellectual disabilities in about a third of the individuals on the spectrum. And it could be, I think earlier we've said no two individuals with autism are alike. They're all different. So in that sense, there may be a higher predisposition in a subset or a group of individuals with autism. I believe the function of the brain is different in individuals with autism, and that puts them at a high risk of having a seizure disorder. That would be the response I would give, but I'll be happy to hear if Dr. Maria and Leah have any other thoughts on this one, or Dr. Abeba as well.
I don't have any specific comments to add. I agree with what Dr. Sulaisi said. I guess I just want to say, if anyone is interested in learning more about the genetics, please feel free to reach out directly. I'll be happy to send you more information, tell you more about the study, our goals, and connect with you. So thank you. And Dr. Berhane, I need to drop off.
Yes.
I want to thank you again, everyone, for this wonderful
you.
opportunity and for the families who joined us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Maria. Okay,
The
I'm gonna,
seizure question, can I answer the seizure question?
please,
We
yeah.
have a video on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's we have a neurologist that did a presentation about autism and seizures. So I'm trying to find it. I think somebody else put the link for our YouTube, but it's a good one. And the finding usually, my son also has seizures, is they don't know why. It's just part of, like the doctor said, some kind of the brain disorder, that we see seizures, and we see it mostly in during early childhood or adolescence. And I think we also see it higher in a more severe form in in women with autism.
Okay, I will get to Merhet's question and then Ababa's question, and then we're going to have to stop, and then we'll let Leah share her resources, and I'll address just a couple more things in the chat box. But Merhet Shabatu, I think you had your hand raised, so I'm sorry I didn't get to you earlier, but if you want to ask your question now, go ahead.
Thank you, Leah, Dr. Aba, كلكم بتقريني أخذتكم. دكتور قرب كونفيز دخون كوانا جرالا بزعبان دك أنيسيو خاب سلاسل حموشتن دك تبعتيو خبر 4 عامت إذا خيتها بكرة خلا تدديو إذا الريسك زجاتم ولا تبكرة خلا كيتها بكرة دحرت أني حنك كندي برسنتج ريسك زلوا أبز حجي خنريان دحر كوين ناسي بتعمي أب young age autism زلوهم قلعوا بتعمينا نري second نليان تايلخ حتى Leah, I am so proud of you. You're doing a great job. تقريني أخذ بتعامل صبو دك ناسي speech دليم speech دليم دفر كوينسي كل التوانقوا affecti قبرهم دي إذا نجارزي بزتي زكاة أب تمرتي English أب ABA ترابي أب كل ترابي تاكم اندفر English كوين جزا مسينا خا أنت رأى أنقوا أنا نزاربهم كوين ناس affecti قبرهم دي كال أي فتيك أنتيا بوزح يا خمس درابيت سرحي تي كل زلوت رئيو يخي أب هزبنا بتعمي بوزح دنا يالله السو مخري بكنا خدنا كنقبر كم زي بلنا قلتيفنا كنقوي كم زلنا قال وي يتأبو يقبلو وي يتأدى تقبلو نبون ندنسي انتاي مخرته بنا نهزبنا سنتاي مخرته بيو بتعمي هذا مسكنكم يقني الله انجليش غيركم كتملوا صوت قوليكم سقمي الله
Okay. I will go ahead.
እሞ ኣነ ብትግርኛ እንድያ ተሓቶ መፂኣ ብትግርኛ ገይረ ክምልሳየ እሞ ኢድካ ከዓ መጀመርያ ስለ ዝኾንኪ ኢት ዘበልኪ ብትዕግስ ስለ ዝፀናዕኪ የቕኒየልና እቲ ናይ ዕድመ ናይ ኣደ ዋላ ናይ ኣቦ ኢለ ዘቕረብክዎ ኣብ ኣደ እንድሕር ጥንሲ ካብ 35 ዓመት ንላዕሊ ወይ ናይ ኣቦኻ 40 ዓመት ንላዕሊ كل جزء زي كونسي كم ريسك فاكتور مالتيسي بزعد مزخو سخ خيليو مالت يمبر هاب كل جزء سخون مالت ايكونن حق خاخم تزبلكيو كاو كمان ازيوم زنسو دقوم اوتيزم تتحازو سلازلو ناقدن مستعد مستتحازز زي كونس ريسك فاكتور نبلو منالباش مستعد مستتحازز تخوينو مزعد متات مس زبلص مسكونن مالت يمبر نحبهم زنسو يغوانف ايكونن مالت ايكونن. So if I was to answer it in English, even though the age that I have put up on the slide, the mother's age 35 and the father's age 40 at the time of conception is a potential risk factor. That's not necessary. It means there may be a higher chance of autism, of children with autism being born. But it's absolutely accurate and correct to say that there are younger parents who can have children with autism.
Did anybody, anything else, Leah, or move to the next question?
About parental age, I think he explained it.
Okay.
I think we are seeing also younger parents having children. So it's one of the risk factors, not the only risk factor. So it could be one of the risk factors.
Yeah.
As far as the question she asked about speech and talking for our kids that are diagnosed with autism, should we be also speaking to them in our language? I think when they are going to, if they're early learners, meaning they're nonverbal, we're teaching them words, then we need to use the same words ABA therapy or speech is using. But for our kids that have learned the language, adding another language, research has shown is not a bad thing too. If mom only speaks Tigrinya, let her speak to him in Tigrinya. If mom only speaks Amharinya, she needs to speak to him in Amharinya. But for the words, they're early learners. I'm going to say, let's use whatever ABA is using. As they get older, exposing them to different languages is not gonna affect them that much. From what I understand about mom and dad working together, mom has accepted it, dad has not accepted it. It's everybody has a stage, like I shared. Some parents, dad is going to accept it before mom, mom is going to, and sometimes dad, I know dads that haven't accepted it, the kid is 20. So what we have to do as parents is we do our share to support your child. We don't, just because dad says no doesn't mean we're not going to. We have to keep doing our best to support that child. We expose them to a lot of the information that we are sharing, that how important it is to do early intervention. But some parents are stuck in one stage of the acceptance process. One parent has to keep going because we can't waste the child's time to please the other parent. That's my thing. Is the marriage at stake? That's for marriage counselors.
Yep. Yes, and I also recommend that, and that's recommended from the Academy of Pediatrics, is that if the household speaks 2 languages, you encourage each language, whether it's Tigrinya and English, Amharic and English, and even Spanish and English. You know, there's so many households in the US that speak multiple languages. It's encouraged to speak all of those languages. So I hope that families here can do that too. Okay, our last question, and I'll have this for Leah, if you can answer it in 60 seconds or less, that's okay.
Impossible.
Okay, it is from it is about CPS. So, you know,
Yes.
families with autism have a higher rate of CPS involvement. And so do you have any like tips on how to navigate that? You know, I know that must be hard for a Habesha family to get CPS involved and the stigma with that. So what's your experience?
Okay.
Yeah.
I work extensively with CPS because I do get a lot of calls about a child that is, the school might be calling, the pediatrician might be calling. It's usually a miscommunication between what school expects the parents to do or the doctor. They might deny vaccine for one of the things or some kind of treatment. I think CPS primarily wants to know that the child is safe and healthy. I have never had concerns in our community so far with CPS. I think we have to be frank. We have to let them know that we are giving care. Just denying or not talking to them is not something I recommend because they want to make sure, that's their job, to make sure that the child is safe. If you are taking care of your child, find a doctor or practitioner that allows you to do how you want to take care. If you're vaccine free, find a physician that's accepting of that. If the school keeps calling you about calling CPS, we suspect, because sometimes CPS doesn't tell us who called on us. If they called, if it's the school you suspect, have a meeting with them and discuss things. When we hide things, when we're not open with our struggles or with our thing, is when the school might call. Sometimes I see a little bit of retaliation from the school. It's like, well, if you don't do this or don't do that, I'm going to call CPS. But I think it's usually a miscommunication. I'm very willing to help anybody who has CPS problems. A lot of the families I support, when CPS comes, I said, give them my number and I will walk them through it and maybe get the family involved to come up to a solution to what the problem was, what the suspected problem the family was causing the child. Or so it's not something in my experience to be afraid of. They're just their job to make sure your child is well, because we live in America. You hear the news, you hear about all these sad situations that are occurring in home. Another one that I get from CPS is when kids wander off and the police finds them. The police have to get CPS involved to make sure the family is well equipped to take care of that child. So in a nutshell, that's my answer.
Thank you. Okay, we will have to now conclude. So thank you all for your time. This was a wonderful webinar. And I'm really grateful for our speakers tonight. So thank you guys for your time and your expertise in helping the families. Leah, you can go ahead and share your page, your last slide, so people can take a screenshot of that. That's a direct way to contact Leah. I also put in our organization's email in the chat box. Isaias, I did get your email, so I will save that information, but I'm going to put it in the chat box again. There was a question about future events. We will have future events, so that's why I want you all to email us. Your email